I'm standing in front of a federal courthouse in Denver, watching a woman I once considered my enemy climb the stone steps toward her sentencing. Vivienne Blackwell moves slowly, like she's walking through water, each step a negotiation with gravity and shame. The morning sun catches the gray in her hair that was perfect and controlled when we first met, now loose and uncertain. She doesn't look back at me. She doesn't look at anyone. She just keeps moving forward, because that's all that's left to do when everything else has fallen apart. But that's not where this story begins. 8 months earlier, I thought I knew what peace looked like. I thought it meant silence. The kind of silence you find in empty rooms and long highways, the silence that comes after the shooting stops and the dust settles, and you realize you're still breathing when others aren't. I'd spent 18 years in the Marine Corps chasing that silence, and another 2 years after my discharge trying to find it in civilian life. Turns out, silence in a war zone and silence in suburbia are two completely different animals. The house in Riverside Falls, Colorado seemed like the answer to a question I'd been asking since Kabul. It was a modest 2-story craftsman with a brick facade and a front porch that sagged just slightly in the middle, like it was tired of holding itself up. The real estate photos showed mature oak trees lining the street, lawns cut with precision, flowers blooming in neat rows. A gated community, the listing said, with a homeowners association that maintained high standards of living. I didn't know what that meant then. I know now. The moving truck pulled into the driveway on a Tuesday morning in late April, when the Colorado sun was still gentle and the air smelled like possibility. I'd driven 18 hours straight from Virginia, stopping only for gas and coffee, because I didn't trust myself to sleep in hotels anymore. The nightmares had gotten worse after the divorce. Emily used to wake me up when they started, her hand on my shoulder, her voice pulling me back from Kabul to our bedroom in Arlington. Now there was no hand, no voice, just the nightmares and the 3 a.m. panic attacks and the sweating through sheets. In the passenger seat of the truck sat the only reason I was still alive. Sergeant, 130 pounds of black and tan Rottweiler, looked at me with brown eyes that held more understanding than most humans I'd known. He wasn't just a dog. The paperwork from Dr. Sarah Kim at the VA hospital made that clear. Trained service animal for post-traumatic stress disorder, capable of deep pressure therapy, crowd buffering, nightmare interruption, and panic attack alert. What the paperwork didn't say was that Sergeant had found me on a bathroom floor with a bottle of pills in my hand 6 months after Emily left, and he'd knocked the bottle away and laid his massive body across my chest until I started crying instead of swallowing. I put the truck in park and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, breathing in the newness of it all. This was supposed to be the fresh start. This was supposed to be where healing happened. Sergeant yawned, a sound that started as a squeak and ended as a low groan, and used his nose to push against my arm. Time to move. Time to start building whatever came next. The neighborhood was quiet in the way that expensive neighborhoods are quiet. No kids shouting, no music from open windows, no lawn mowers or hammering or life spilling messy and loud into the street. Just the whisper of sprinklers and the distant hum of a golf cart electric motor approaching from somewhere I couldn't see. I climbed out of the cab, my knees making sounds like gravel shifting, and walked around to lower the truck's ramp. The metal screeched against asphalt, and I saw curtains twitch in the house across the street. Already being watched, already being evaluated. I was wrestling with a box labeled kitchen when the golf cart turned the corner. It was white, pristine, with a small amber light mounted on top like it belonged to some miniature emergency service. The woman driving it didn't get out right away. She sat there adjusting her rearview mirror, checking something on her phone, and I had the distinct impression she was building up to something, gathering ammunition for a conversation I didn't know we were about to have. When she finally stepped out, she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, wearing a floral blouse that was aggressive in its brightness and white capri pants that had never seen a spill or a stain. She carried a clipboard, and nothing good has ever come from a person holding a clipboard in a residential neighborhood. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, not crossing onto the concrete, like there was an invisible property line she was respecting for now, but might not respect later. "Good morning," she said, and her voice had the quality of someone used to being listened to. "I'm Vivienne Blackwell, president of the Riverside Falls Homeowners Association. Welcome to the community." I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried to summon the energy for neighborly small talk. Marcus Thornton, just moving in. Her eyes moved past me to the truck, cataloging contents, making mental notes. Then her gaze dropped to the driveway, to an oil stain that had been there when I bought the house, a ghost left by the previous owner's aging sedan. "The previous residents didn't address that," she said, nodding at the stain. "It's a violation of Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our community standards. Oil stains must be remediated within 24 hours of discovery." I blinked at her, trying to process whether she was serious. It's my first day. I'll get some kitty litter on it once I unpack. She made a note on her clipboard, a violent scratching sound. "We like to maintain a certain caliber here in Riverside Falls," she continued. "Standards matter. They protect everyone's property values." "I understand," I said, "because what else do you say to someone like that? The house looks great. The neighborhood is beautiful. We work hard to keep it that way." She looked at the moving truck again. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted to park overnight on residential streets. You'll need to return that by 6 p.m. "It's a rental. I'll have it back this evening." She nodded, satisfied, and turned to leave. That's when Sergeant decided he'd been patient long enough. I'd left the passenger door open a crack for air, and he nosed it fully open and jumped down onto the pavement with a heavy thud that made Vivienne Blackwell freeze mid-step. She turned slowly, and her face underwent a transformation I wouldn't understand until much later. All the professional composure drained away, replaced by something raw and ancient. Fear. Real, visceral, animal fear. "What," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger, "is that?" "That's Sergeant," I said, walking over to rest my hand on his massive head. "He's my dog." "That is not a dog." Her voice climbed an octave. "That's a beast. That's a wolf." She took a step backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. "We have strict rules. Very strict. Bylaw 4.2 clearly states no dogs over 40 pounds and absolutely no aggressive breeds. No pit bulls, no Dobermans, and definitely no Rottweilers." She said Rottweiler like it was a curse word, like the syllables themselves might bite. "He's not aggressive," I said, and I could feel my jaw tightening, that old familiar pressure building in my chest that Sergeant was trained to recognize. This was the part I hated, explaining my medical history to strangers in floral prints who thought they had the right to know. Sergeant is a service animal. He's trained for a disability. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act protect him. He's exempt from breed and weight restrictions. Vivienne let out a laugh, dry and sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, please, don't try that with me. Everyone tries that now. Oh, it's my emotional support peacock, it's my anxiety iguana. We don't do that here. This isn't California. We have standards." "He's not an emotional support animal," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "He's a task-trained service dog required for a medical condition. Federal law supersedes your bylaws, Ms. Blackwell." Her face flushed red, the color rising from her neck to her cheeks like a thermometer measuring anger. She stepped forward, encroaching on my driveway, on my space, on the boundary she'd so carefully respected 30 seconds earlier. "Now you listen to me," she said, and her voice dropped to something dangerous and quiet. You might think you can waltz in here with your moving truck and your monster dog and quote laws at me, but you are mistaken. The Riverside Falls Homeowners Association Handbook is a binding contract. You signed an acknowledgement of the covenants at closing. I signed an acknowledgement that I received them. Those covenants can't violate federal civil rights law. We'll see about that. She pointed her pen at Sargent like it was a weapon. That thing is a liability. Look at its jaws. Look at its size. If that animal is not removed from the premises by 5 p.m. today, I will call animal control to have it seized as a public nuisance, and I will fine you $500 per day for every day it remains. The heat in my chest wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, more focused. It was the feeling I used to get in Fallujah right before a mission, when everything slowed down and sharpened and became crystal clear. I looked at Vivienne Blackwell, really looked at her, and I saw something underneath the authority and the clipboard and the perfectly pressed capris. I saw fear. Genuine, bone-deep fear. "Ms. Blackwell," I said quietly, and I used the voice I used to use with new recruits who were about to do something catastrophically stupid. "Do not call animal control. Do not fine me. I will provide the management company with my documentation this afternoon. A letter from my psychiatrist and Sargent's vaccination records. That is all you are legally entitled to receive. Leave my dog alone." 5 p.m., she said, and she was already walking back to her golf cart, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. "Or I call the police." She gunned the electric motor and sped away at a blistering 12 miles per hour, and I stood there in my driveway watching her disappear around the corner, feeling the sun on my neck and Sargent's weight against my leg, and the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger, purpose. I looked down at Sargent, and he looked up at me with those patient brown eyes, waiting for direction, waiting to see what we'd do next. "Well, buddy," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "I think we just found the enemy." The rest of the day passed in a blur of boxes and furniture and the mechanical rhythm of unpacking a life. I set up the bed frame, assembled the couch, created order out of chaos one piece at a time because that's what you do when your brain needs structure to keep from spiraling. Every time I walked out to the truck for another load, I felt eyes on me. Curtains twitching, shadows moving behind windows, the neighborhood watch conducting its silent surveillance. At 4:30 in the afternoon, I sat down at my laptop, balancing it on a moving box because I hadn't set up the desk yet, and drafted the most professional, polite email I could manage to the property management company listed in my welcome packet. I attached Dr. Kim's letter stating that I required a service animal for PTSD management. I attached Sargent's rabies certificate and proof of training certification. I attached a photo of him sleeping with a stuffed duck in his mouth to demonstrate that he was not, in fact, a demon from hell. Subject line: Service Animal Documentation, 124 Maple Drive. "To whom it may concern," I wrote, "please find attached the documentation for my service animal, Sargent. As discussed with Ms. Blackwell earlier today, Sargent is a task-trained service dog essential for managing my medical condition. Per the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, he is exempt from breed and weight restrictions outlined in the HOA bylaws. I look forward to being a quiet and respectful member of the Riverside Falls community." I signed it, attached the files, and hit send before I could second-guess the wording. There. Done. Surely someone in the chain of command would look at this, see the words service dog and Ada, and tell Vivienne Blackwell to stand down. That's how the world worked, right? Logic prevailed. Reason won. Federal law meant something. I checked my watch. 5:05 p.m. I was late returning the truck, but only by 5 minutes, and surely that wouldn't matter. At 5:08 p.m., a private security car pulled up to my curb. A man in a uniform that looked like it came from a Halloween discount store got out, walked up my driveway with the energy of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else, and taped an envelope to my front door. He didn't knock. He didn't make eye contact. He just stuck the envelope there with clear packing tape and retreated to his vehicle like he was dropping off a subpoena. I walked outside and ripped the envelope off the door. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper with the Riverside Falls logo embossed at the top, an oak tree that looked like it was whispering secrets. Notice of violation, it read. Resident, Marcus Thornton. Violation, possession of prohibited breed, Rottweiler, possession of animal exceeding 40 pounds. Fine, $500 per day. Remedy, immediate removal of animal. Additional note, the board has reviewed your email sent at 4:30 p.m. The board does not recognize psychiatric service animals for breeds categorized as inherently dangerous by the association. Your request for accommodation is denied. You have 24 hours to remove the animal, or further fines and legal action will be initiated. I stood there on my front porch, holding the paper, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They'd denied it. They'd actually looked at federal law and said, no, we don't do that here. They'd put it in writing. Inside the house, Sargent was chewing on a Kong toy, blissfully unaware that he'd just been declared illegal. I watched him for a moment, this gentle giant who'd pulled me back from the edge more times than I could count, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic, not fear, determination. I pulled out my phone and started searching. HOA denying service dog, disability discrimination lawyer, Fair Housing Act violations. The results came back in pages and pages of legal firms and advocacy groups and news stories about people who'd fought these battles before. Some had won. Some had lost everything trying. One name kept appearing in the search results. Elena Rodriguez, civil rights attorney specializing in housing discrimination. Her firm's website was clean and professional, with photos of her standing in front of courthouses, arms crossed, looking like she'd just won something important. The tagline read, "Justice delayed is justice denied." I clicked the contact form and started typing. My name is Marcus Thornton. I'm a veteran with PTSD. I just moved into Riverside Falls, Colorado, and the HOA has denied my service dog despite proper documentation. They've put it in writing that they don't recognize federal disability law. I need help. I hit send and closed the laptop. The house felt too quiet suddenly, too empty, filled with boxes and furniture that didn't yet feel like home. I walked to the back door and let Sargent out into the yard, watching him explore the perimeter, nose to the ground, cataloging all the smells left by previous dogs and wild animals and rain. The yard wasn't fenced. That was on my to-do list for next week, but now it felt urgent, necessary. If Vivienne Blackwell wanted to come after Sargent, I needed a physical barrier. I needed walls. I pulled up Google on my phone and searched for fence contractors, looking for someone who wouldn't ask too many questions and could start immediately. Most of the results were big companies with professional websites and 2-week lead times. But one listing caught my eye, Big D's Construction and Fencing. The website was bare bones, just a photo of a chain-link fence and a phone number. Perfect. I called. A voice answered on the second ring, rough as sandpaper. Big D's. Yeah, hi, my name is Marcus. I just moved into Riverside Falls and I need a fence. A big one. 7 feet, privacy style, and I need it yesterday. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a low chuckle. Riverside Falls? You mean Vivienne Blackwell's personal kingdom? That's the one. What you do to piss her off already? I have a dog she doesn't like. Another laugh, deeper this time. Brother, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to give that woman a reason to regret her life choices. She blacklisted me from working in that neighborhood because I have a record. Never mind that I've been clean for 15 years, got a license, got insurance, got a legitimate business. She took one look at my past and said no. I need that fence, I said, and I need it to send a message. What kind of message? The kind that says I'm not going anywhere. There was a beat of silence, and then, I'll be there in an hour. Bring the heavy equipment. He hung up before I could say thank you. Sergeant came back inside, panting from his exploration, and collapsed on the kitchen floor in a patch of sunlight. I sat down next to him, running my hand over his head, feeling the solid warmth of him, the realness of him. We're going to war, buddy, I told him, but we've been to war before, and we know how to win. He licked my hand, unconcerned. As far as Sergeant knew, every day was a good day if I was in it. An hour later, exactly as promised, a massive yellow Ford F-350 with a lift kit and dual rear wheels pulled up in front of my house. The truck was so bright it looked like it belonged to a highway construction crew. The man who climbed out matched the truck in presence. 6'4", built like a vending machine, with forearms covered in tattoos and hands that looked like they could bend rebar. "Marcus," he called out. "That's me. You must be Big D." "Dante Morrison," he said, and his handshake was exactly as crushing as I expected. Most people call me Big D. Vivienne Blackwell calls me a lot of things, none of them polite. "I appreciate you coming out on short notice." He looked at my house, then at the property line, then pulled out a measuring tape and started walking the perimeter. "You want this fence to be legal, or you want it to make a statement?" "Both, if possible." He grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "I like you already. Here's what we're gonna do. State law says you can build a 6-foot fence for animal containment without HOA approval. But your HOA bylaws probably say no privacy fences, right?" "Right, they want open-style fencing only." "Which directly conflicts with state building code regarding containment of animals classified as potentially dangerous. And since Ms. Blackwell has officially classified your dog as dangerous in her little violation notice, you are now legally required by the county to have a secure fence. If you follow the HOA rules, you violate county code. If you follow county code, you violate HOA rules. And county wins. Every single time." He pulled out a notebook and started sketching. "We're gonna build you a 7-foot cedar privacy fence with pressure-treated posts set 3 feet deep in concrete. Board-on-board construction so there's no gaps. Self-closing gate with a keypad lock. And we're gonna do it in 3 days. Won't she try to stop you?" "Oh, she'll try." He looked at me, and his eyes had the gleam of someone who'd been waiting a long time for payback. "But I've got permits, I've got code compliance, and I've got 18 years of pent-up frustration with that woman. Let her try." We shook hands again, and this time it felt like sealing a pact. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in a room that still smelled like fresh paint and moving boxes, staring at the ceiling, listening to Sergeant breathe on the floor beside me. The house made unfamiliar sounds, settling noises and wind through eaves, and the distant hum of the highway that was supposed to be far enough away that I couldn't hear it but somehow wasn't. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, an email notification. I picked it up, squinting at the screen's brightness. The email was from Alina Rodriguez, and she'd sent it at 11:43 p.m., which either meant she worked late or she'd been intrigued enough by my message to respond immediately. "Mr. Thornton," she wrote, "I've reviewed your situation. Riverside Falls HOA has a documented history of disability discrimination that I'm personally familiar with. If you're serious about fighting this, I can help. But I need to warn you, Vivienne Blackwell doesn't lose gracefully. This will get expensive, time-consuming, and ugly. If you want to settle quietly and move somewhere else, I understand. If you want to burn it all down and set precedent, call me tomorrow." Either way, I'm sorry you're dealing with this. You deserve better. Her phone number was listed at the bottom of the email. I read it 3 times, then set the phone down and closed my eyes. Emily's voice echoed in my memory from one of our last arguments before she left. You're so good at fighting, Marcus. You fought in Iraq, you fought in Afghanistan, you even fought the VA for your benefits. But you never learned how to stop fighting. You never learned how to just live. She'd been right, in a way. Fighting was what I knew. Fighting was where I felt competent and useful and like I had a purpose beyond just surviving. But this wasn't about fighting for the sake of fighting. This was about Sargent. This was about the one thing in my life that actually worked, that actually helped, that kept me tethered to this world when everything else felt like it was trying to pull me under. I reached down and rested my hand on Sargent's side, feeling his ribs expand and contract with each breath. He shifted in his sleep, made a small sound that was almost a whimper, and settled deeper into dreams of whatever dogs dream about. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered to him, to the darkness, to myself, and neither are you. When dawn came, I was already awake. I'd been awake for hours, watching the gray light creep across the bedroom's ceiling, listening to the neighborhood come alive with the sound of garage doors opening, and cars starting, and people heading off to jobs that didn't involve navigating PTSD and HOA tyranny. I fed Sargent, made coffee that was too strong and too bitter, and sat on the front porch watching the morning unfold. At 7:15 a.m., Dante's bright yellow truck turned onto my street, followed by a bobcat skid loader on a trailer and a crew cab full of workers. The cavalry had arrived. Dante climbed out, stretched, and walked up my driveway like he owned the place. "Morning," he said. "You ready to make some enemies?" "I've been making enemies my whole life," I told him. "At least this time it's for a good cause." He laughed and signaled to his crew. Within 10 minutes, they had the bobcat off the trailer and were marking the property line with orange spray paint. The sound of the diesel engine and the post hole digger cut through the suburban quiet like a chainsaw through silk. It took exactly 14 minutes for the golf cart to appear. I'd timed it. Vivienne Blackwell came around the corner at full speed, which for a golf cart meant about 12 miles per hour, but she looked like she thought she was driving a Formula One car. She had a passenger this time, a thin, nervous-looking man holding a legal pad. Backup, apparently. She slammed on the brakes, and I swear the golf cart went up on 2 wheels. Before it had fully stopped, she was out and marching toward where Dante stood at the controls of the bobcat. "Stop," she screamed over the engine noise. "Stop this immediately. Cease and desist." Dante powered down the machine. The sudden silence was deafening. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. "Morning, Vivienne," Dante said pleasantly. "Beautiful day for digging holes." Her face was already red, a vein pulsing visibly in her temple. "You are on the blacklist, Dante Morrison. You are not permitted to work in this community." "I'm on the public street, and I'm working on private property." He gestured to where I stood on my porch. "Mr. Thornton's private property. Nothing in your bylaws says he can't hire whoever he wants." She spun toward me, and if looks could kill, I'd have been a smoking crater. "You did not submit an ARC application. You cannot build a fence without Architectural Review Committee approval. This is an unauthorized structure." I tapped the body camera I'd clipped to my shirt that morning, the little red light blinking steadily. "State code allows fencing for animal containment. You classified Sargent as dangerous. I'm simply complying with county safety regulations." "I didn't tell you to build a wall," she shrieked, and her voice had gone up another octave. "I told you to remove the dog. This monstrosity will block sight lines. It will ruin the open aesthetic of the neighborhood. I will not allow it." "The posts are going in, Ms. Blackwell." I kept my voice level almost gentle. "Dante, keep digging." The bobcat roared back to life, and Vivienne looked like she was about to have a stroke. She turned to the nervous man with the legal pad. "Write this down, Jerry. Willful noncompliance. Destruction of community aesthetic values. Call the police. Tell them we have an illegal contractor trespassing." I stepped off the porch and walked closer, but not too close. "Ms. Blackwell, if you call the police, tell them to bring a surveyor. Because if you step 1 foot onto the property line where Dante is working, you're the one who's trespassing. I have a survey. My fence is 6 inches inside my property line, and I have a right to build it." She stared at me, and for a moment I thought she might actually swing at me. Her hands were balled into fists, shaking at her sides. This was a woman who'd probably never been told no in 20 years, a woman whose entire identity was wrapped up in control and order and making sure everything stayed exactly where she wanted it. "You will regret this," she whispered, and it was scarier than the screaming. "I will put a lien on this house so fast your head will spin. You will never be able to sell. You will be buried in legal fees. I will bankrupt you." I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I'd seen this playbook before. Threats, intimidation, overwhelming force. It worked on people who were afraid to lose what little they had. It didn't work on someone who'd already lost almost everything that mattered. "Did you catch that?" I asked, looking down at the body camera. "Ms. Blackwell just threatened to financially destroy me on tape. That should make for interesting evidence." Her eyes went wide as she realized what she'd done. She straightened her floral blouse, lifted her chin, and turned on her heel. "Come on, Jerry," she snapped. "We have paperwork to file." They retreated to the golf cart, and she peeled out with as much drama as an electric vehicle can manage. Dante waited until they were gone, then killed the Bobcat engine again. "That woman is something else," he said, shaking his head. "She's scared," I said, surprising myself by saying it out loud. "Of what?" "Of losing control, of chaos, of anything she can't predict and manage." "Well," he said, firing the engine back up, "she's about to lose control of this situation real fast. Because this fence ain't going nowhere." By the end of the day, 12 posts stood like sentinels around my property, pressure-treated 4x4s sunk deep into concrete, perfect and immovable. The fence wasn't finished, but the boundary was drawn. The line had been established. I sat on my back porch that evening with Sargent at my feet, looking at those posts in the fading light, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not quite peace, not yet, but possibility. The possibility that I could make a home here. The possibility that I could defend it. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Thornton." A woman's voice, professional, warm. "This is Elena Rodriguez. I hope it's not too late to call." "It's not. I was just admiring my new fence posts." She laughed. "I heard about those. Vivienne must be losing her mind." "That's the idea." "Listen," she said, and her tone shifted to serious. "I've been thinking about your case all day. I want to help you, but I need you to understand what you're getting into. Vivienne Blackwell isn't just a difficult HOA president. She's smart, connected, and has resources. Her husband is a partner at one of the biggest law firms in Denver. She has a judge in her pocket. She will use every trick, every loophole, every delay tactic in the book." "I've fought worse enemies." "Have you? Because this isn't a battlefield where the rules are clear. This is suburban warfare where everything is passive-aggressive and covered in legalese and designed to grind you down slowly until you give up." "I'm not giving up," I said. "Sargent is the only thing keeping me alive. If I let them take him, I might as well put a gun in my mouth." There was silence on the other end of the line, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Okay. Okay, then we fight. But we fight smart. No more confrontations with Vivienne. Let me handle all communication. You document everything, you keep Sargent safe, and you let me build the legal case. What's the first step? The first step is we wait for her next move. And trust me, there will be a next move. People like Vivienne always escalate. She was right. 3 days later, when Dante's crew finished the fence and it stood 7 feet tall and beautiful and impenetrable, I found 13 separate violation notices taped to my door. Fines totaling $8,000 for everything from improper window treatments to unauthorized landscaping changes I hadn't even made yet. The war had officially begun. And somewhere across the street, in her perfectly maintained house with its perfectly trimmed lawn, Vivienne Blackwell was planning her next attack, not knowing that she'd just declared war on someone who'd learned a long time ago how to fight battles that seemed impossible to win. I called Alina and read her the list of violations. She's building a debt, Alina said. She wants you to owe so much money that when she moves to foreclose, it looks justified. Can she actually foreclose? If you don't pay, and if the debt gets big enough, yes. Virginia law gives HOAs incredible power. But here's what she doesn't know. Every single one of these violations is going to become evidence. She's documenting her own discrimination. What do I do? You do nothing. You don't pay a dime. You keep living your life. You let Sargent do his job, and you let me do mine. That night, I sat with Sargent in our fenced backyard for the first time, the cedar walls blocking out the neighbors and their judgment and their prying eyes. The stars were visible overhead, brilliant and uncaring. Sargent leaned against my leg, warm and solid and real. I thought about Vivienne Blackwell, about the fear I'd seen in her eyes that first day, about the desperation in her voice when she threatened me. She wasn't evil. She was broken, and broken people break other people unless someone stops them. I wasn't going to let her break me. I'd been broken enough times to know what it felt like, to know the warning signs, to know when to dig in and fight and refuse to bend. Tomorrow, Dante would send me the bill for the fence. Tomorrow, Alina would file the formal complaint with the Department of Justice. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, in this moment, with my dog beside me and walls around me, and the first real sense of home I'd felt since the divorce, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd found the place worth fighting for. Sargent sighed and laid his head on my knee, and I ran my fingers through his fur, feeling each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of life that he'd given back to me. "Good boy," I whispered. "Best boy. We're going to be okay." And somewhere in the darkness, I almost believed it. The thing about suburban warfare is that it doesn't announce itself with gunfire or explosions. It arrives on cream-colored stationery, delivered by people in polo shirts who smile while they hand you your own execution papers. By the end of the first week in my new home, I had 23 separate violation notices taped to my door, fines totaling just over $12,000, and a certified letter informing me that the Riverside Falls Homeowners Association Board would be holding an emergency meeting to discuss my immediate removal from the community. I sat at my kitchen table, which I'd finally assembled the night before, spreading the notices out like a general studying battlefield maps. Each one was typed in the same officious font. Each one referenced specific sections and subsections of bylaws I'd never agreed to follow. Each one carried Vivienne Blackwell's signature at the bottom, sharp and decisive as a knife slash. Violation 27 accused me of maintaining a lawn height exceeding 3 inches. I'd been in the house for 6 days. Violation 31 claimed my outdoor lighting was insufficiently shielded, creating light pollution. I didn't have outdoor lighting yet. Violation 34 stated that my fence construction had generated excessive noise during restricted hours. The restricted hours, according to Bylaw 12.6, were any time before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m. Dante's crew had worked from 8:30 to 5:45. They were building a debt, just like Alina had said. Every violation came with a fine. Every fine accrued interest at 18% annually, and unpaid fines could result in a lien against the property. It was a machine designed to grind people down, to make fighting back more expensive than just surrendering and walking away. My phone rang. Alina Rodriguez, calling at 7:15 in the morning. "Did you get the emergency meeting notice?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "It came yesterday, Thursday at 7 p.m. "Don't go alone, I'll be there. And Marcus, this is good news." "How is any of this good news?" "Because they're panicking. Vivienne doesn't call emergency meetings when she's confident. She calls them when she's scared. Your fence went up despite her threats. You haven't paid a single fine, and you're still there with Sargent. She's losing control, and people like her can't handle that." "So what happens at the meeting?" "They'll vote to increase fines, probably to $1,000 per day. They'll vote to begin foreclosure proceedings. They'll make a show of authority. But here's what they won't do. They won't actually kick you out. Because that requires a lawsuit, and a lawsuit requires discovery, and discovery means I get to examine every decision they've made for the past decade." "You sound like you're looking forward to this." "I've been practicing civil rights law for 12 years, she said, and her voice had an edge of something fierce and hungry. "I've seen people like Vivienne Blackwell destroy families, ruin lives, all in the name of property values and community standards. If I can use your case to set precedent, to make it harder for every other petty tyrant with a clipboard, then yes, I'm looking forward to it." "What do you need from me?" "Keep documenting. Keep being the perfect neighbor except for the dog they can't legally exclude. Don't give them anything real to use against you." "What about the fines?" "Don't pay them. Not 1 cent. They're invalid under federal law, and paying would be admitting they have authority they don't possess." We hung up, and I looked at Sargent, who was sprawled on the kitchen floor in a patch of morning sunlight, completely unconcerned with the bureaucratic machinery grinding away at our existence. "You're causing a lot of trouble, buddy," I told him. He yawned, showing me every tooth in his massive head, and went back to sleep. I spent that morning doing something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk. Not for therapy, not for exercise, but because I wanted to see the neighborhood I'd apparently declared war on. Sargent walked beside me in his red service dog vest, the words "Do Not Pet" printed in white letters across his sides, and we followed the sidewalk that wound through Riverside Falls like a river through expensive terrain. The houses were beautiful in that carefully curated way that costs a fortune to maintain. Every lawn was exactly 3 inches high, every flower bed mulched with the same reddish-brown bark, every driveway pressure-washed to surgical cleanliness. Wind chimes hung silent in the still air. American flags drooped on poles that had been positioned at regulation height and distance from the street. We passed a woman in yoga pants walking a small white dog, something fluffy and acceptable, under 40 pounds. She saw Sargent and crossed to the other side of the street without making eye contact. We passed a man washing his car in his driveway, and he stopped mid-scrub to watch us go by, his expression somewhere between curiosity and concern. 3 blocks from my house, we came to the community park, a small green space with a playground and a gazebo and a path that circled a retention pond. A man was sitting on a bench near the water, watching his daughter on the swings. I recognized him, Thomas Wayne, the neighbor who'd warned me about Vivienne on my first day. He saw me coming and stood up, nervous energy in every movement. "Mr. Thornton," he said, glancing around like he was checking for surveillance, "I wanted to apologize for not saying more when you first moved in." "You don't owe me an apology." "I do, though." He looked at his daughter, a girl maybe 12 years old, swinging with fierce concentration. That's Emma. She has autism. High functioning, but she struggles with anxiety, with crowds, with unexpected changes. She's beautiful, I said and meant it. Her therapist recommended a service dog 2 years ago. Not for mobility or medical alerts, but for emotional regulation. The kind of deep pressure therapy your dog provides. Why didn't you apply? Because I knew Vivienne would say no. He rubbed his face with both hands. I'm on the HOA board. I voted to deny your accommodation request, and I voted yes because I was afraid of what would happen to my family if I didn't. The shame in his voice was thick enough to choke on. I understand, I said, and I did. Fear makes people do things they hate themselves for later. I'd seen it in combat, seen good men make terrible choices because the alternative seemed worse. I'm resigning from the board, he said, after the emergency meeting. I can't do this anymore. But I wanted you to know that if you win this fight, you're not just fighting for yourself. Emma could have what she needs. Other families could stop being afraid. He called his daughter over, and she came reluctantly, hiding behind her father's leg when she saw Sergeant. Emma, this is Mr. Thornton and his dog, Sergeant. Is he nice? She asked, her voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear it. He's the nicest, I said. Would you like to pet him? She nodded, and I gave Sergeant the release command. He approached slowly, lowering his head to her level, and she reached out with trembling fingers to touch his fur. The transformation was immediate. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slowed, and she actually smiled. He's so soft, she whispered. That's because he's a good boy. I watched her run her hands over Sergeant's head, and I thought about all the kids like Emma who needed this, who could have this, if people like Vivienne Blackwell would just get out of the way. Thomas was crying silently, tears running down his face as he watched his daughter experience something he'd been too afraid to pursue. Thank you, he managed to say. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. But we walked home with something that felt a lot like purpose. The days leading up to the emergency meeting passed in a strange limbo. I worked on the house, unpacking boxes and assembling furniture and creating the appearance of normalcy, while violation notices continued to accumulate on my door like fallen leaves. Dante finished the fence, and it was a masterpiece. 7 feet of solid cedar, capped with decorative lattice that added another 6 inches of height, gates reinforced with steel hinges that would outlast the house itself. Vivienne drove by 4 times a day in her golf cart, slowing down to stare at the fence like she could will it out of existence through sheer disapproval. I started waving at her every time I saw her. She never waved back. Alina called me Wednesday night, the evening before the meeting. I found something, she said, and her voice had that quality of barely contained excitement. I hired a private investigator to look into Vivienne's history, her background, her motivation, anything that might explain why she's so fixated on control. I'm listening. She had a son, Andrew Blackwell. He died 10 years ago of a fentanyl overdose in an apartment in Denver. Jesus. It gets worse. The apartment building had no HOA, no landlord oversight, multiple code violations. When Vivienne found him, the place was apparently in complete disarray. 6 months after his death, she ran for HOA President in Riverside Falls. She's been in the position ever since. So this is about her son. This is about trauma, Alina said. She's trying to control an environment so completely that nothing bad can ever happen again, which is impossible, but she doesn't know that. Or she knows it but can't stop trying. Does that change anything, legally? No, trauma doesn't excuse discrimination, but it might help you understand what you're up against. This isn't just about rules for Vivienne. This is about preventing another tragedy, even if the tragedy she's preventing is imaginary. I thought about that after we hung up. I thought about Vivienne Blackwell sitting in an apartment in Denver 10 years ago, finding her son's body, having her world end in a moment that could never be undone. I thought about how that kind of pain could twist a person, could take someone who probably started out wanting to help and turn them into someone who hurt people in the name of protection. It didn't make what she was doing right, but it made it human. Thursday arrived with thunderclouds building over the mountains, the kind that promised rain but never quite delivered. I put on a clean shirt and dark jeans, the closest thing I had to business casual, and clipped the body camera to my chest. Alina had insisted, record everything, document everything, let them hang themselves with their own words. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the clubhouse, a building at the center of the development that looked like someone had tried to recreate a New England town hall in Colorado and gotten most of the details wrong. Cars filled the parking lot an hour early. Apparently, this was the most entertainment Riverside Falls had seen in years. Alina met me outside at 6:45. She wore a navy suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 100 courtrooms. Her handshake was firm, professional, and somehow reassuring. "Ready?" she asked. "No." "Good. Neither am I. That's when we do our best work." We walked in together, sergeant between us, and the room went silent. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. I counted maybe 70 people packed into a space designed for 50, standing room only along the walls, the air already thick with body heat and tension. The HOA board sat at a long table at the front of the room, and for the first time I saw all 5 of them together. Vivienne in the center, of course, her face composed and controlled. Thomas Wayne to her right, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. A woman in her 60s with perfect silver hair and a tight smile. A nervous-looking man in his 40s who kept adjusting his glasses. And an architect type with expensive frames and an expression of studied neutrality. Vivienne banged a gavel. An actual wooden gavel like this was a real courtroom, and the murmuring died away. "This emergency meeting of the Riverside Falls Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We are here to address a critical matter regarding violations at 124 Maple Drive and the continued presence of a prohibited animal in direct contravention of our community covenants." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. "The board has prepared a resolution," she continued, and she lifted a sheet of paper like she was Moses reading commandments. "Resolution 2024A, immediate remediation of hazardous conditions. This resolution calls for daily fines of $1,000 until the prohibited animal is removed, immediate removal of the illegally constructed fence, and authorization for the board to place a lien on the property to cover accumulated fines and legal expenses." $1,000 a day. I did the math. $30,000 a month. $90,000 in 3 months. They were going to bury me in debt so deep I'd have no choice but to sell. "Is there any discussion from the board?" Vivienne asked, looking at her fellow members like she was daring them to dissent. Thomas Wayne cleared his throat. His hands were shaking as he lifted them to rest on the table. "Vivienne, I have to say something." "You may speak." "This isn't right." He looked at me, then at the crowd, then back at Vivienne. "Mr. Thornton has a service dog. He's provided documentation from the VA. Federal law is clear about this." "Federal law doesn't override private contracts," Vivienne said sharply. "Actually, it does." The nervous man with the glasses spoke up, his voice cracking. "I looked into this. The Fair Housing Act specifically prohibits discrimination based on disability. Service animals are protected." Vivienne's face flushed red. "We are not discriminating. We are enforcing safety standards." "Based on what?" Thomas was standing now, his voice stronger. Based on breed. That's literally discrimination. The room erupted. People shouting over each other, some supporting Vivienne, others questioning, the noise rising like a wave. Vivienne banged the gavel repeatedly, the sound sharp and desperate. Order, we will have order. Elena stood up, and somehow her presence commanded more silence than the gavel. Ms. Blackwell, my name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm Mr. Thornton's attorney. Before you vote on this resolution, I need to inform the board that any action taken against my client based on his service animal will be reported to the Department of Justice as a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Additionally, any attempt to place a lien or foreclose based on these invalid fines will result in immediate legal action, and I will personally ensure that every board member is named individually in the lawsuit. You can't threaten this board, Vivienne said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. I'm not threatening, I'm informing. You have a choice. Withdraw this resolution and work with us to find a reasonable accommodation or proceed and face federal investigation. Those are your options. The room had gone completely silent again. I could hear the air conditioning humming, could hear someone's phone vibrating against a table. We'll take a brief recess, Vivienne said. She stood abruptly and walked out a side door, and the other board members followed like ducklings, Thomas Wayne bringing up the rear with an expression of grim determination. They were gone for 23 minutes. I counted every one of them. Elena stood next to me, calm and still, while the crowd buzzed with speculation. People kept glancing at me, trying to figure out if I was the hero or the villain of this particular suburban drama. When the board returned, something had changed. Thomas Wayne wasn't with them. The nervous man with glasses looked even more nervous, and Vivienne's face had gone pale, drained of color and fight. She sat down, picked up the gavel, and tapped it once. The board has voted, she said, and her voice was hollow. The resolution passes 3-1 with one abstention. Mr. Thomas Wayne has resigned from the board effective immediately. A gasp went through the crowd. Thomas had been on the board for 6 years. Mr. Thornton, you have 30 days to comply with the removal order or face foreclosure proceedings. Elena was on her feet instantly. Let the record show that this vote violates federal civil rights law. We will be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice within 24 hours. Vivienne didn't respond. She just banged the gavel and said, "This meeting is adjourned." People streamed out of the clubhouse in clusters, some angry, some satisfied, most just uncomfortable. I waited until the crowd thinned, and then I approached the board table. Vivienne was gathering papers, moving mechanically. "Ms. Blackwell," I said. She looked up, and for a moment the mask slipped. I saw exhaustion in her eyes and something that looked like desperation. "I don't expect you to understand," she said quietly, "but I'm trying to protect people." From what? From chaos, from entropy, from the kind of disorder that destroys communities. I'm not disorder. I'm just a man trying to live with his dog. Your dog represents everything I've worked to prevent. Large animals, unpredictability, the potential for violence. Sargent hasn't shown an ounce of aggression. You're projecting your fears onto him. She closed her briefcase with a sharp snap. In 30 days, Mr. Thornton, you'll understand that I always win these fights. Always. She walked out, leaving me standing in the empty clubhouse with Elena and Sargent, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. "That went well," Elena said dryly. "Did it?" She voted to discriminate on the record, in public, with 70 witnesses. She couldn't have handed us a better case if she'd tried. So what happens now? Now we file with the DOJ. Now we wait for the federal government to take an interest in Riverside Falls, Colorado. And now you prepare for this to get much, much worse before it gets better. She was right, of course. She was always right. The retaliation started the next morning. I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted the word dangerous across my fence in red paint, the letters 3 feet tall and dripping like blood. The police came, took photos, filed a report, and told me there wasn't much they could do without witnesses or cameras. I didn't mention that Dante had installed security cameras on every corner of my property 2 days earlier. I just thanked them and let them leave. The footage showed 3 men in dark clothing, faces covered, arriving at 2:30 in the morning in a vehicle registered to the HOA Management Company, the same company that had Vivienne's sister as CEO. Elena filed the evidence with the police and the DOJ. The wheels of justice began their slow, grinding turn. 2 days later, I came home from the grocery store to find animal control in my driveway. They'd received a complaint about a dangerous animal at my address, aggressive behavior toward neighbors, failure to maintain proper restraints. The officer was apologetic but firm. He needed to see documentation, needed to verify that Sargent was properly licensed and vaccinated. I showed him everything. Dr. Kim's letters, training certificates, vaccination records, the service dog registry identification. The officer looked it over, looked at Sargent sitting calmly by my side, and shook his head. "Sir, this dog is clearly well-trained and properly documented. I don't know who called this in, but it's a waste of city resources." "Can you tell me who made the complaint?" "It was anonymous, but between you and me, we've been getting a lot of calls from this neighborhood lately. All anonymous, all about the same property." After he left, I sat on my porch and tried to count how many different ways Vivienne Blackwell was coming at me. Legal action through the HOA, vandalism through proxies, false reports to animal control, financial pressure through fines, social pressure through neighborhood gossip. It was comprehensive, coordinated, and relentless. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Mr. Thornton?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "This is Special Agent Victoria Cross with the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. We've received your complaint regarding housing discrimination. I'd like to schedule a time to discuss your case." I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized was clenched tight. "Of course. When would you like to meet?" "How about tomorrow morning? I'm already in Denver on another matter. I can drive out to Riverside Falls." She came the next day in a black SUV with government plates, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe, and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and lie the human mind could produce. She sat in my living room, declining coffee, and pulled out a legal pad that was already half filled with notes. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from the beginning." I told her about moving in, about Vivienne's reaction to Sargent, about the violation notices and the emergency meeting and the spray paint and the anonymous complaints. She took notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking questions that made it clear she'd already done extensive research. "Do you know about Vivienne's son?" I asked. "Andrew Blackwell. Died in 2014. I'm aware." "Does that affect anything?" "It explains motivation, but it doesn't excuse behavior." Agent Cross looked at me directly, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Mr. Thornton, I've worked civil rights cases for 15 years. I've seen discrimination disguised as community standards in neighborhoods from Seattle to Miami. Riverside Falls has been on our radar for a while." "For what?" "Pattern and practice. Over the past 12 years, 17 families have been evicted or pressured to leave this community. 11 of them were racial minorities. 4 had disabled family members. The HOA has systematically used bylaw enforcement to create demographic homogeneity. You're saying Vivienne is running a discrimination campaign. I'm saying she's created an environment where certain people aren't welcome, and she's used bureaucratic tools to enforce that. Whether she's conscious of the racial and disability bias in her decisions, I can't say. But the impact is clear. What happens now? Now I investigate. I'll interview current and former residents, review HOA records, examine every denial and eviction from the past decade. If I find what I think I'm going to find, the Department of Justice will file a lawsuit against Riverside Falls HOA. Not just for your case, but for systematic civil rights violations. How long will that take? Months, probably, maybe longer. In the meantime, continue documenting everything. Don't pay the fines, don't remove Sargent, and stay safe. People get desperate when federal investigators start asking questions. She left me with a business card and a sense that I just lit a fuse on something much bigger than a simple housing dispute. That night, for the first time since moving to Riverside Falls, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nightmares or PTSD, but because I kept thinking about those 17 families Agent Cross had mentioned. 17 families pushed out, their lives disrupted, their sense of home and safety destroyed. And I'd stumbled into the middle of it just by wanting a place to exist quietly with my dog. Sargent sensed my restlessness and climbed onto the bed, which he wasn't supposed to do, but which I never had the heart to prevent. He settled his massive weight against my side, warm and solid and real, and gradually my breathing synchronized with his. "We're in deep now, buddy," I whispered into the darkness. He sighed, a sound of contentment and trust, and somehow that was enough to let sleep finally come. The DOJ investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Agent Cross had interviewed 40 current residents and tracked down 12 of the 17 families who'd been forced out. The stories were remarkably consistent: sudden enforcement of obscure bylaws, mounting fines for trivial violations, pressure campaigns through neighborhood gossip and social exclusion, and eventually, the choice to leave rather than face foreclosure. One of the families she interviewed was Maria Gonzalez, who'd been evicted in 2018 for what the board called excessive cooking odors and noise violations. The noise violations turned out to be her speaking Spanish on the phone in her own backyard. The cooking odors were the smell of traditional Mexican food that Vivienne had decided wasn't compatible with the community's aesthetic. Elena tracked Maria down in Arizona, where she'd moved after losing her house, and convinced her to give a deposition. The woman's testimony was devastating. Vivienne had personally supervised noise monitoring equipment installed near Maria's property line, had documented every instance of Spanish language use as a violation of quiet enjoyment standards, and had increased fines until the total reached $60,000. "We have her," Elena told me over the phone after the deposition. "Maria's case alone establishes pattern and intent. Combined with your case and the others, this is federal civil rights violation territory." What's the next step? Agent Cross is presenting findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office next week. If they agree to prosecute, Vivienne and the entire HOA board could face criminal charges. Criminal? I thought this was civil. Wire fraud is criminal. Using HOA funds to hire investigators to dig up dirt on minorities is criminal. If they find evidence of conspiracy, RICO statutes come into play. RICO, like organized crime. An HOA is a corporation. If that corporation is used to systematically deprive people of civil rights and enrich those in power, it meets the definition. I felt something twist in my stomach. I'd wanted to stop Vivienne from taking Sargent. I hadn't wanted to destroy her life. "Marcus, are you having second thoughts?" I don't know, maybe. She lost her son. She's operating from trauma. So are the 17 families she displaced. So is Emma Wayne, who can't get the therapy dog she needs because she's afraid. Trauma doesn't give you permission to traumatize others. I know. I just wish there was a way that didn't involve burning everything down. There is, Alina said. It's called settlement, but Vivienne would have to agree to it. And people like her don't settle until they're backed into a corner with no way out. The corner came 2 weeks later, delivered by courier to Vivienne's house on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Thomas Wayne told me about it later. He'd been walking his dog past her house when the black SUV pulled up, when Agent Cross and another federal investigator approached Vivienne's door with a subpoena for all HOA records, all financial documents, all correspondence related to residency decisions for the past 12 years. Vivienne had tried to refuse. Agent Cross had politely explained that refusal to comply with a federal subpoena was obstruction of justice and carried penalties, including imprisonment. Vivienne had called her lawyer, Richard Moss, who'd apparently told her to comply immediately and stop talking to anyone without him present. They were in her house for 4 hours, Thomas said. They came out with 6 boxes of documents and a hard drive from her personal computer. The neighborhood was in chaos. Rumors spread through the community email chain and the private Facebook group and the morning coffee gatherings at the clubhouse. The DOJ was investigating financial crimes. Vivienne had embezzled money. The HOA was going to be dissolved. Property values were going to collapse. Everyone was going to be sued. None of it was true, but fear doesn't require truth to spread. I got a call from Robert Blackwell 3 days after the search. Vivienne's husband, though I'd heard they were separated and heading toward divorce. Mr. Thornton, his voice was strained, controlled. I know we haven't met, but I need to speak with you. Not as Vivienne's husband. As someone who's watched this situation spiral out of control. I'm listening. My wife is not well. She hasn't been well since our son died. This HOA presidency has been the only thing keeping her functional, giving her a sense of purpose and control. If the DOJ charges her, if she loses everything, I'm genuinely afraid of what she might do. Is this a threat? It's a plea. I'm asking you to consider a settlement. Drop the federal complaint, agree to mediation, let her resign quietly. I'll personally compensate you for any losses, whatever you think is fair. Your wife tried to take my home and my service dog. She's done the same thing to 17 other families. Why would I let her walk away? Because mercy is stronger than justice, he said. Because you're a better man than she is. Because maybe you understand what it's like to be broken and need a second chance. I thought about that for a long moment. I thought about the pills on the bathroom floor and Sergeant knocking them away. I thought about Dr. Kim giving me a second chance when other doctors had written me off. I thought about Emily, my ex-wife, who tried to save me until she couldn't anymore. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking. But even as I hung up, I knew what Alina would say. I knew what Agent Cross would say. Mercy was a luxury you could afford when the person you were showing it to hadn't systematically destroyed other people's lives. That night, I took Sergeant for a walk through the neighborhood, the longest walk we'd taken since moving in. We went past every house, every perfect lawn, every family living behind their walls of affluence and fear. Lights glowed in windows, showing me glimpses of other lives. A couple eating dinner in silence, kids watching television while parents scrolled phones, an old man sitting alone in a room full of furniture. We walked past Vivienne's house and I saw her through a window. She was sitting at a table with papers spread in front of her, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small, human, breakable. Sergeant pulled toward her house, sensing distress the way he was trained to sense mine. "Not this time, buddy," I told him, and we kept walking. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I was capable of the kind of mercy Robert was asking for. I didn't know if Vivienne deserved it. I didn't know if giving her a second chance meant taking it away from the next person she'd target when the fear came back and the need for control reasserted itself. All I knew was that I'd started something that was bigger than me now, something that had momentum and weight and consequences I couldn't fully predict. The federal government was involved. Other families were coming forward. The machine of justice had started grinding, and I didn't know if I had the power to stop it even if I wanted to. We came home to find another violation notice on my door. Number 57. Failure to maintain approved color scheme on fence stain. The fence was natural cedar. The approved color was natural cedar. The fine was $250. I pulled it down and added it to the pile that had grown so large I'd needed to buy a filing cabinet just to organize it all. Somewhere in her house across the street, Vivienne Blackwell was probably filing the same notice in her own records, documenting the evidence of her own destruction, unable to stop even though she must have known by now that every violation notice was another nail in her own coffin. We were both trapped in a pattern neither of us knew how to escape. The only question was who would break first, and what would be left standing when they did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late June, when the Colorado sky was still bright at 8 p.m., and the heat of the day had finally started to ease into something breathable. I was in my backyard with Sargent, throwing a tennis ball that he'd retrieve exactly 3 times before deciding the game was beneath his dignity, when I heard the scream. It came from the direction of the community park, high and sharp and unmistakably distressed. Sargent's ears went up immediately, his body shifting into alert mode, waiting for my command. I was already moving toward the gate, muscle memory from 18 years in the Marines overriding any civilian hesitation about getting involved in other people's emergencies. The park was 3 blocks away, but I could hear shouting now, multiple voices overlapping in confusion and panic. I ran, Sargent keeping pace beside me, his weight and presence somehow making me feel less like I was running toward trouble and more like I was running toward a problem I was equipped to handle. When I rounded the corner into the park, I saw the crowd first. Maybe 20 people gathered in a loose circle near the gazebo, all of them focused on something at their center. As I pushed through, I saw Vivienne Blackwell on the ground, her body curled into a defensive position, hands over her head, making sounds that weren't quite words. Thomas Wayne was kneeling beside her, his phone in his hand, talking to what I assumed was a 911 dispatcher. Emma stood a few feet away, her own hands pressed over her ears, overwhelmed by the noise and chaos. "What happened?" I asked Thomas. "I don't know," he said, his voice tight with stress. "We were walking, and she just appeared from nowhere. Started yelling at Emma about being too close to her, about the dog Emma was supposedly going to get, about how she wouldn't allow it. Then she just collapsed, started screaming." Vivienne's screams had become a kind of keening now, wordless and terrible. I'd heard sounds like that before, in field hospitals and burning buildings, the sound of a mind that had reached its absolute limit and fractured under the pressure. "Everyone step back," I said, using the command voice that still came naturally even after years out of uniform. "Give her space." The crowd shuffled backward, uncertain, looking to each other for guidance on what to do when a pillar of their community fell apart in public. I knelt down a few feet from Vivienne, close enough to speak but far enough to not feel threatening. "Ms. Blackwell," I said quietly. "Vivienne, can you hear me?" She didn't respond, just kept rocking, kept making that awful sound. I looked up at Thomas. "When the ambulance gets here, tell them possible panic attack or psychotic break. She needs psychiatric evaluation, not just medical." You're helping her. Thomas looked baffled. After everything she's done. I'm helping a human being who's in crisis. That's different than forgiving what she's done. Sargent had been sitting beside me, perfectly still, watching Vivienne with an intensity that suggested he understood something was wrong. Without any command from me, he moved forward slowly, lowered his body to the ground, and placed his head near Vivienne's folded arms. She flinched at first, then went very still. Her keening stopped, replaced by harsh, ragged breathing. He's not going to hurt you, I said. He's just trying to help. Vivienne's hands slowly uncurled from around her head. She looked at Sargent, really looked at him, and something in her face shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it I saw recognition of something she'd spent months denying. That this animal she'd declared dangerous was offering her the exact thing she needed most. Comfort without judgment. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched Sargent's head. He didn't move, just kept his eyes on her, patient and steady. I lost him, she whispered, and it took me a moment to realize she wasn't talking about Sargent. I lost Andrew and I couldn't save him, and I thought if I could just control everything, if I could just make everything safe and perfect and ordered, then nobody else would die, nothing else would break. I know, I said. But it didn't work. Her voice was hoarse, raw. I made everything worse. I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I became the kind of person Andrew would have hated. The ambulance arrived then, its lights painting the park in alternating red and white, and the paramedics took over with practiced efficiency. They got Vivienne onto a stretcher, checked her vitals, asked questions about medications and medical history that nobody could answer. She kept looking back at Sargent as they wheeled her away, something desperate and lost in her eyes. Is she going to be okay? Emma asked, and her voice was so small and frightened that it broke something in my chest. I don't know, sweetheart, but she's getting help now. That's the first step. After the ambulance left and the crowd dispersed, murmuring among themselves about what they'd witnessed, Thomas and I sat on a park bench while Emma played on the swings with the determined focus of a child, trying to process something too big for her understanding. Thank you, Thomas said. For handling that, I was useless. You called 911. That's the opposite of useless. She's been unraveling for weeks, ever since the DOJ started investigating. Her husband left, her friends stopped calling, the board members all resigned except Margaret. She's completely isolated. That's what happens when you build your entire life around control, and the control slips away. He was quiet for a moment, watching Emma swing. Are you going to drop the complaint, now that you've seen her like this? I haven't decided yet. She needs help, not prosecution. She needs both. I looked at him directly. Thomas, she destroyed 17 families before mine. Maria Gonzalez lost her house because Vivienne didn't like the smell of her cooking. An elderly woman with Parkinson's couldn't get a service dog because Vivienne's certification standards were impossibly high. Your own daughter couldn't get the therapy she needs because Vivienne made you afraid to even ask. That's not just someone having a breakdown. That's someone who used their power to hurt people, consistently, for years. So what's the answer? The answer is accountability. She gets help, yes. She gets therapy and medication and whatever treatment she needs. But she also faces consequences. She repays the money she took, she makes amends to the families she hurt, and she never has the power to do this to anyone else again. And if she can't handle that, then that's the consequence of her choices. I stood up, called Sargent to my side. I didn't make her have a breakdown in the park, Thomas. Years of living with unprocessed trauma and wielding power like a weapon made her have a breakdown. I'm just the person who finally said no. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Vivienne's face when she touched Sargent. The way the fear and resistance had crumbled, just for a moment, into something vulnerable and human. I kept seeing her curled on the ground, her mind finally surrendering to the weight it had been carrying for a decade. I called Alina and told her what happened. "This changes things," she said immediately. "If she's having psychiatric episodes, her lawyer will use that to argue diminished capacity. They'll push for medical intervention instead of legal consequences." "What do you think?" "I think trauma isn't an excuse, but it is an explanation. And I think the justice system isn't built to handle the difference between someone who's malicious and someone who's broken." We sat in silence on the phone for a moment, both of us grappling with the same impossible question. How do you hold someone accountable when their actions come from a place of profound pain? "Marcus," she said finally, "I need to ask you something. If Vivienne agreed to a settlement right now, would you take it?" "What kind of settlement?" "Full restitution to you and the other families. Her resignation from the HOA with a permanent ban on any leadership position. Mandatory therapy and community service. A public apology acknowledging what she did and why it was wrong. But no criminal prosecution." "Would that be enough?" "For the law, no. But maybe for the people she hurt, yes. Maybe for you." I thought about it. I thought about what I wanted when this started. Just to keep Sargent, just to have a home where I felt safe. I'd gotten both of those things already. The fence was built. The federal investigation had made it clear the HOA couldn't touch me, and my PTSD had actually improved in the weeks since the fight began because having a purpose had given me something to focus on besides my own trauma. But I also thought about Maria Gonzalez in Arizona, about the elderly woman who'd been denied her service dog, about Emma Wayne who still didn't have the therapy animal that could help her. This wasn't just about me anymore. "Set up a mediation," I said. "Let's see if she's capable of genuine accountability. If she is, we'll talk settlement. If she's just looking for an easy out, then no deal." Fair enough. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a conference room at a mediation center in downtown Denver, sitting across a table from Vivienne Blackwell and her attorney, Richard Moss. Alina sat beside me, her briefcase open, legal pads filled with notes. Agent Victoria Cross was there too, representing the federal government's interest in the case. Vivienne looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Her hair, which had always been perfect and controlled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup. Her clothes were casual, almost shapeless. And her eyes, when she finally looked at me, held none of the fire and authority I'd come to expect. They just looked tired. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with an air of having seen every human conflict imaginable, opened the session with ground rules. No interruptions, no personal attacks, focus on resolution rather than blame. Everyone agreed, though Vivienne's agreement came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ms. Blackwell," the mediator said, "would you like to begin by explaining your perspective?" Vivienne's hands were clasped on the table in front of her, knuckles white with tension. "I lost my son 10 years ago," she said, and her voice was flat, rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech 100 times. "He died of an overdose in an apartment that had no oversight, no standards, no one making sure things were safe. After he died, I became HOA president because I thought I could prevent that kind of chaos. I thought if I enforced rules, if I maintained control, I could create a place where nothing bad would happen." She paused, swallowed hard. But I was wrong. I didn't create safety. I created fear. I didn't prevent harm. I caused it. Mr. Thornton didn't do anything wrong. His dog isn't dangerous. I was afraid of dogs because one bit Andrew when he was 7, and I never dealt with that fear. I just let it control me. And when Mr. Thornton challenged my authority, I escalated because I couldn't bear the idea of losing control again. It was a good speech, probably written by her therapist or her lawyer or both, but it felt hollow, performed rather than felt. Do you understand what you took from people? Elena asked, her voice sharp. Maria Gonzalez lost her home because you decided her culture was incompatible with your aesthetic. An elderly woman with Parkinson's was denied basic accommodation. 17 families had their lives uprooted because they didn't fit your vision of what the community should look like. I know, Vivienne said, and now there was emotion creeping into her voice. I know what I did. I've spent the last 2 weeks in intensive therapy trying to understand how I became someone capable of that. And the truth is, I don't have a good answer. Grief did it. Fear did it. Unchecked power did it. But those aren't excuses. They're just explanations. What are you willing to do to make it right? I asked, speaking for the first time. She looked at me directly, and I saw something genuine in her eyes for the first time since we'd met. Anything. Everything. I have $120,000 in savings. I'll split it between you and the families I hurt. I'll resign from the HOA immediately. I'll agree to never serve in any community leadership position again. I'll do whatever community service the court requires. I'll write personal apologies to every single person I harmed. And the criminal charges? Agent Cross asked. That's not up to me, Vivienne said, looking at the federal agent. I understand if the government wants to prosecute. I embezzled HOA funds. I violated civil rights laws. I deserve whatever consequences come from that. The room was quiet for a long moment. Moss, her attorney, looked like he wanted to object to his client confessing to federal crimes, but Vivienne held up a hand to stop him. I'm done hiding, she said. I'm done pretending I was justified. I hurt people because I was hurting, and that's not acceptable. So I'll face whatever comes. I just want Mr. Thornton to know that he was right about everything. His dog isn't dangerous. I am, or I was. I'm trying very hard not to be anymore. Something about the way she said it, the exhaustion and resignation and genuine remorse, made me believe her. Maybe it was wishful thinking. Maybe I wanted to believe that people could change because I needed to believe I could keep changing too. But I looked at this woman who'd tried to destroy me, and I saw someone who'd been destroyed by their own actions. I have a condition, I said. Name it. You contact every single one of the 17 families you forced out. Not through a lawyer, not through a letter. You call them or visit them if they'll allow it, and you apologize face to face. You hear what you did to them. You sit with the consequences. Her face went pale. Some of them won't want to see me. Then you try anyway. You make the attempt. You put yourself in the position of asking for something you have no right to expect. That's what accountability looks like. I'll do it. And you work with Alina to establish a fund for families who need service animals, but can't afford them. You spend the next 5 years actively helping people get the accommodations you spent 12 years denying. Yes. And you let me bring Sargent to visit you. Once a month, for a year. You sit with the dog you were so afraid of, and you learn why he's not the monster you thought he was. Her eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that? Because hating you hasn't made me feel better. And maybe if you actually deal with your fear instead of projecting it onto others, you won't hurt the next person who needs help. Agent Cross spoke up. Mr. Thornton, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but the federal government has an interest in prosecuting violations of civil rights law. This isn't just about your case. I understand. But if Vivienne does everything she's promised, if she makes genuine restitution and demonstrates real change, would that affect your recommendation? It might, if she pleads to misdemeanor charges, accepts probation, and complies with all the terms you've outlined. But I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking. The mediation continued for another 3 hours, hammering out the details of the settlement. Vivienne would pay restitution totaling $120,000, divided among the 18 families she'd harmed. She would resign from the HOA effective immediately and sign a binding agreement never to serve in community governance again. She would complete 1,000 hours of community service with disability rights organizations. She would attend weekly therapy for at least 2 years. And she would plead guilty to 1 count of misdemeanor housing discrimination, accepting whatever sentence the court deemed appropriate. In exchange, Alina and I would support a recommendation for probation instead of jail time, and we would work with the DOJ to emphasize her cooperation and remorse. When we finally signed the agreement, Vivienne's hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. After it was done, she looked at me across the table. "Can I say something?" she asked. "Go ahead." "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that Sargent is beautiful. When he put his head near me in the park, when I finally let myself actually see him instead of my fear, I understood what I'd been trying to take from you. He's not just a dog. He's your lifeline. And I almost cut it because I couldn't face my own demons." "He saved my life," I said simply. "Multiple times. He's the reason I'm still here." "Then I'm grateful he exists, and I'm sorry I tried to separate you from him." We left the mediation center as the sun was setting over Denver, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Alina walked me to my truck, where Sargent was waiting in the cab, his face pressed against the window. "You did a good thing in there," she said. "Did I? Or did I just let someone off easy because I felt sorry for them?" "You set terms that require real change, real accountability. That's not letting her off easy. That's believing in the possibility of redemption while still demanding justice." I opened the truck door and Sargent bounded out, immediately pressing his weight against my legs in the grounding pressure I'd come to depend on. The mediation had been stressful, my heart rate elevated, my breathing shallow. He'd sensed it even from the parking lot. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait. Vivienne contacts the families. The court approves the settlement. The DOJ decides whether to accept the plea. And you go back to Riverside Falls and actually try to live the quiet life you moved there for." "Think that's possible?" "With you, probably not. You seem to attract drama." "I didn't attract this. This found me." She smiled, squeezed my shoulder, and headed to her own car. I watched her go, then climbed into the truck with Sargent. He settled into the passenger seat, his head resting on the center console, and we drove back to Riverside Falls in comfortable silence. The neighborhood looked different when I pulled onto my street. Maybe it was the evening light, or maybe it was the weight of the settlement lifting off my shoulders, but the houses seemed less threatening, the perfect lawns less oppressive. This was just a place where people lived. Some of them were kind, some were scared, and some were broken, like everywhere else. There was an envelope taped to my front door. I pulled it off, expecting another violation notice, but the handwriting was different, shaky and uncertain. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Mr. Thornton," it read, "I heard what happened at the mediation. Thomas told me. I'm one of the board members who resigned after you moved in. My name is Stephen Park. I resigned because I couldn't be part of what Vivienne was doing to you, but I was too afraid to oppose her directly. I'm ashamed of my cowardice. I wanted you to know that there are people in this community who support you, who are grateful you stood up when we wouldn't. Thank you for having the courage we lacked. If you ever need anything, I'm at 892 Oak Street. Stephen." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. Small kindnesses, small gestures of solidarity. They didn't erase what had happened, but they suggested that maybe, eventually, healing was possible. That night, I sat in my backyard with Sargent, the fence Dante had built surrounding us like the walls of a fortress. The cedar had weathered to a soft gray in the 2 months since construction. the sharp smell of fresh-cut wood replaced by the earthier scent of aging timber. My phone rang. Elena. Maria Gonzalez just called me, she said, and her voice held something I'd rarely heard from her. Surprise. Vivienne contacted her, drove to Arizona, showed up at Maria's apartment, and apologized face to face. What did Maria say? She said Vivienne cried for 20 minutes, told her everything about Andrew, about the fear, about using the HOA as a way to control her grief. Maria didn't forgive her, but she accepted the apology, and she took the restitution check. That's one down, 16 to go. Marcus, I've been doing this work for 12 years. I've never seen someone who abused power actually follow through on making amends. Usually, they just lawyer up and minimize. Vivienne is actually doing the work. Maybe she means it. Maybe. Or maybe she's just trying to avoid jail time. Does it matter if the outcome is the same? I guess not. Over the next 3 weeks, Vivienne contacted all 17 families. Some refused to see her. Some accepted her apology but wanted nothing more to do with her. A few, like Maria, engaged in longer conversations about what had happened and why. Each one took a piece of her, wore her down a little more, forced her to sit with the full weight of what she'd done. Thomas told me she'd lost 15 pounds, that she wasn't sleeping, that her therapist had her on medication for depression and anxiety, that she'd told Margaret, her only remaining friend, that facing the people she'd hurt was harder than anything she'd ever done, including burying her son. Good, I thought. It should be hard. Atonement that comes easy isn't really atonement. The court date came on a humid morning in late July. The federal courthouse in Denver was imposing, all marble and flags and the weight of institutional power. Vivienne arrived with Richard Moss, wearing a simple dress, no jewelry, her face bare of makeup. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. The judge was a woman in her late 60s, Judge Patricia Morrison, with steel-gray hair and eyes that suggested she'd heard every excuse humanity could produce. She read through the plea agreement carefully, asking questions about the restitution plan, the community service terms, the therapy requirements. Ms. Blackwell, she said finally, I've reviewed your case extensively. I've read the victim impact statements, including Mr. Thornton's. I've reviewed the DOJ investigation findings, and I've noted your cooperation and the steps you've taken toward restitution. Vivienne stood with her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. The court finds that you systematically violated federal housing law, that you used your position to discriminate against residents based on disability and, in some cases, race. You caused real harm to real people. The fact that you were operating from a place of trauma doesn't excuse that harm. I understand, Your Honor. However, the court also notes that you've shown genuine remorse, that you've begun making restitution, and that Mr. Thornton, the primary complainant, supports a sentence focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Judge Morrison paused, looking at the papers in front of her. I'm accepting the plea agreement with the following sentence: 3 years supervised probation, 1,000 hours of community service with disability advocacy organizations, mandatory weekly therapy for the duration of probation, and full restitution as outlined in the settlement. You are permanently banned from holding any position in homeowners association governance. Violation of any of these terms will result in the activation of a 5-year suspended prison sentence. Vivienne's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank Mr. Thornton. He showed you more grace than you showed anyone else. After the sentencing, we stood outside the courthouse in the Denver heat. Vivienne approached me hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she had permission to speak. I start my community service next week, she said. At the VA, helping veterans apply for service dog programs. Good. I'm scared that I'll fail, that I'll hurt someone again without meaning to. Then stay scared. Fear can be useful if you let it make you careful instead of cruel. She looked at me for a long moment, then held out her hand. I shook it, and her grip was surprisingly firm. I'll see you next month, she said, for the visit with Sergeant, if that offer is still open. It is. She nodded and walked away, Richard Moss at her side, and I watched her go with a feeling I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction, not exactly. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of something that could eventually become peace. Alina appeared beside me, her heels clicking on the courthouse steps. We did it. You did it. I just showed up. You did more than that. You chose mercy when you could have chosen revenge. That takes more strength than people realize. I looked at her, this woman who'd fought beside me when she had no reason to beyond believing in the cause. My case isn't your only one. What happens to the other families? The ones Vivienne hurt. 17 separate settlements, all being negotiated now. Vivienne's restitution fund, plus damages from the HOA's insurance policy, plus a federal consent decree that will monitor Riverside Falls for the next 5 years. They'll never be able to do this to anyone again. And Vivienne. If she does everything she's promised, if she actually changes, she gets to rebuild her life. If she doesn't, she goes to prison. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, but it's more than most people get. Justice mixed with mercy. Accountability mixed with second chances. It's messy and imperfect and probably won't satisfy anyone completely. But it's the best we could do. We walked to the parking lot together, and I found Sergeant waiting patiently in the truck, his face pressed against the window, tail wagging when he saw me. I opened the door and he bounded out, and for a moment I just stood there, running my hands through his fur, feeling the solid reality of him. This dog had saved me in more ways than I could count. And in fighting for him, I'd somehow become part of saving 17 other families, forcing a community to confront its own ugliness, and maybe, possibly, helping a broken woman begin the long road to healing. That night back in Riverside Falls, I sat on my porch and watched the neighborhood settle into evening. Lights came on in windows. Families gathered for dinner. Kids rode bikes through the fading light. Everything looked normal, peaceful, but I knew now what lay beneath that surface. The fears and prejudices and small cruelties that people inflicted on each other when they thought they were protecting something important. Thomas Wayne walked by with Emma, and they stopped at the edge of my driveway. We heard about the sentencing, Thomas said. The whole neighborhood's talking about it. I bet they are. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Vivienne needed consequences, but she also needed help. You gave her both. Emma stepped forward, shy but determined. Mr. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. My dad says we can get a therapy dog now, because you made it safe. Is that true? It's true. She smiled, a real genuine smile that transformed her whole face. Thank you. After they left, I called Dr. Kim at the VA. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, I heard about your case. It's been in the news. How are you holding up? Better than I expected. The fight gave me something to focus on besides my own problems. That's often how healing works. We get better by helping others, even when we don't realize we're doing it. I wanted to thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for pushing me to get Sergeant, for all of it. You did the hard part, Marcus. I just pointed you in the right direction. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet with Sergeant's head resting on my knee, and I thought about the long, strange path that had brought me here. From cobble to Virginia to Colorado. From broken to functional to something approaching whole. From isolated to connected, from angry to purposeful. The fence that Dante built still stood, 7 feet of cedar marking the boundary of my property, but it didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like what it was supposed to be, a structure that created safety without creating isolation. And somewhere across the neighborhood, in a house that no longer felt like enemy territory, Vivienne Blackwell was probably sitting with her own thoughts, her own grief, her own long road to redemption. We'd never be friends. We'd probably never even be fully comfortable with each other. But we'd found a way to coexist that didn't require one of us to be destroyed. Sargent sighed, that deep, contented sound he made when all was right with his world. And I realized that for the first time in years, I felt something close to the same. Tomorrow I'd start planning the monthly visits with Vivienne, teaching her about Sargent, helping her confront the fear she'd let control her for so long. Tomorrow, I'd continue building a life in this neighborhood that had tried to reject me. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new problems, new battles. But tonight, in this moment, with my dog beside me and a future that felt possible instead of terrifying, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we were all going to be okay. The first time Vivienne Blackwell came to my house voluntarily, it was a Tuesday afternoon in August, exactly 1 month after her sentencing. Her white golf cart pulled into my driveway at precisely 3 p.m., the same vehicle she'd used to patrol the neighborhood like a general inspecting troops. But the woman who climbed out moved differently now, slower, like someone carrying invisible weight. Sargent stood from the porch shade, his body shifting into alert mode. I rested my hand on his head, feeling the familiar warmth. "It's okay, buddy. We're okay." The aggressive floral blouses were gone. Vivienne wore a faded gray t-shirt and jeans, no clipboard, no camera, no armor. She stopped at the porch edge, that same invisible boundary from our first meeting, and looked at Sargent, not with fear this time, with something closer to reverence. "Thank you for agreeing to this." Her voice was different too, quiet, stripped of command. "Come sit." She climbed the steps like someone approaching a wild animal, settled into the Adirondack chair beside mine, gripped the armrests. Sargent watched, patient, waiting for my signal. "Can he come closer?" "He can do whatever he wants. He's off duty." But Sargent didn't move. Too well trained to approach without permission, too attuned to uncertainty to force interaction. Vivienne swallowed hard. "I've been working with my therapist. On the fear. It started when Andrew was bitten. 7 years old, a neighbor's pit bull, broken arm. I thought he'd be scarred forever. When he grew up and moved away and I couldn't protect him anymore, the fear just transferred to everything I couldn't control." Her hands were shaking in her lap. "Did therapy help?" "Some, but my therapist says exposure is the real treatment. Sitting with the fear instead of running. That's why I'm here." I could have pointed out the irony, could have reminded her of the families she'd denied this same healing. But watching her force herself to face the thing that terrified her most, I just felt tired. "Sargent, friend." The command that meant safety, permission. He stood, stretched, walked slowly to her chair and sat close enough to touch, waiting. "What do I do?" Something desperate in her eyes. "Just touch him. Let yourself feel that he's not what you've been afraid of." Her hand shook as she reached out. When her fingers made contact with his fur, she flinched but didn't pull away. Sargent didn't move, didn't react, just existed peacefully, letting her work through it. Her breathing came ragged, shallow, the breathing of panic attacks, but she kept her hand on his head, kept herself in the moment. "He's so warm," she whispered. That's what everyone says first. In the park, when I was breaking down, he came to me, without you telling him to. He's trained to respond to distress. Doesn't matter whose. He just knows someone's hurting and tries to help. Silent tears ran down her face, her hand still on Sargent's head. I took so much from people, so much. And this animal I tried to ban, he tried to comfort me anyway. That's the thing about dogs. They don't hold grudges. 20 minutes. That's how long it took for her to work up the courage to pet him fully, to run her hands over his ears, to let him rest his head on her knee. By the end, she was breathing normally. Something close to peace had settled over her features. Can I come back next month? That's the agreement. I don't know if a year will be enough. Then we'll see where we are when it's over. After she left, I sat with Sargent in the afternoon heat and thought about what I'd witnessed. Vivienne Blackwell, sitting on my porch, working through trauma with the dog she declared dangerous. Something almost biblical about it. Enemies breaking bread and finding unexpected grace. But grace didn't erase the past. The next day, Maria Gonzalez called. Mr. Thornton, her voice carried confidence built from years of speaking 2 languages. I wanted to thank you. For what? For making Vivienne face what she did. She drove to Arizona, sat in my living room, cried, told me everything about Andrew, about her fear, about using the HOA to control grief. How did that feel? Like poison draining from a wound. I've been angry for 6 years, but seeing her broken like that, owning what she did, some of that anger dissolved. Did you forgive her? No, her voice was firm. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I accepted her apology. And I took the money, $40,000. Doesn't replace what I lost, but it helps. What will you do with it? Move back to Colorado. Denver. My daughter's there. I want to be near my grandchildren. And I want Vivienne to see me rebuilding what she tried to destroy. Over the next 3 months, similar stories filtered back. Some families refused all contact, returning calls unanswered. Others accepted apologies but made clear that forgiveness wasn't on the table. A few, like Maria, found confronting Vivienne actually helped them heal. The neighborhood itself was transforming. Thomas Wayne became president, his first act repealing breed restrictions. Stephen Park pushed through transparency measures requiring all HOA decisions to be documented and accessible. Emma Wayne got her therapy dog in September. I was in my backyard when she appeared at the fence gate, a golden retriever beside her. The dog was everything Sargent wasn't, medium-sized instead of massive, playful instead of serious, golden instead of black and tan. But the competence was identical. Mr. Marcus, can we come in for a playdate? Watching the 2 dogs interact, watching Emma's face light up as the retriever performed deep pressure therapy, I understood what we'd accomplished. This wasn't just about keeping Sargent. This was about creating space for others to get help. Your dog is wonderful, I told Emma. Daddy says we have you to thank. That if you hadn't fought, I wouldn't have Sonny. I fought for Sargent. You have Sonny because your dad had courage to support that fight. She thought about it, serious. Miss Vivienne comes to see you now. Why do you let her? Because she's trying to be better. People deserve a chance to try. Even if they were mean first. Especially then. It's easy to be kind to people who have been kind to you. It's harder to be kind to people who have hurt you. But sometimes that's when kindness matters most. She accepted that with straightforward child logic. The dogs chased each other around the yard. Emma laughed. For a moment, everything felt exactly as life should feel. The second month's visit showed transformation. Vivienne arrived with confidence, went straight to Sargent, knelt to his level, let him lick her face without flinching. We sat on the porch and she talked about the VA. I helped a Marine get a service dog last week. Iraq veteran, PTSD, traumatic brain injury. He reminded me of Andrew. That same broken bravado, acting like everything's fine when it's not. What kind of dog? German Shepherd. Another breed I used to think was inherently dangerous. She laughed without humor. The only thing inherently dangerous was me. You're not dangerous anymore. How do you know? Because dangerous people don't sit on their enemy's porch and admit they were wrong. Don't spend their savings making amends. Don't show up month after month to face what terrifies them. Quiet settled between us. Sargent slept in afternoon sun. Sometimes I dream about Andrew. She watched the sleeping dog. In the dreams, I'm trying to warn him, make him be careful, be safe. But he laughs and walks away. I wake up knowing that's exactly what I did wrong. I tried so hard to control him that I pushed him away. You can't fix the past. No, but maybe I can stop repeating it. That Marine at the VA, when he left with his dog, he thanked me, had no idea who I was or what I'd done. To him, I was just someone helping. For the first time in 10 years, I felt like maybe I could be that person, someone helping instead of controlling. Seasons turned. Summer gave way to autumn. Trees blazed gold and red before surrendering to winter. I settled into routine. Contract engineering from home, daily walks with Sargent, weekly therapy with Dr. Kim, monthly visits from Vivienne that transformed from obligation into ritual. November brought news from Alina. The federal consent decree is finalized. 5 years of monitoring. Any discrimination complaint gets immediate federal review. Quarterly reports required. It's airtight. So we actually changed something. You changed everything, Marcus. I've gotten calls from HOAs across the country reviewing policies before they end up like Riverside Falls. Your case is being taught in law schools. I just wanted to keep my dog. That's how the best cases start. December brought the first real snow. I was shoveling my driveway when Robert Blackwell's car pulled up. I hadn't seen him since mediation. Sargent moved closer as Robert got out, hands raised in peace. Mr. Thornton, 5 minutes of your time. Make it quick, it's cold. He looked older, more gray, deeper lines. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Vivienne. I didn't do it for her. I know, but she's getting better. Really better, not pretending. Therapy 4 times a week. Medication. Actually processing Andrew's death instead of weaponizing it. That's because you forced her to face consequences while leaving room for redemption. A lot of people think I went too easy. A lot of people didn't see what I saw. He paused. The night before mediation, she told me she'd been planning suicide, had pills saved, a note written, waiting until after the court case so her death wouldn't interfere with settlements. You making her choose accountability over escape, that saved her life. Snow kept falling, covering imperfections in temporary white. I failed her. When Andrew died, when she spiraled, I should have gotten help. Instead, I pulled away. Got angry, blamed her for grieving wrong. By the time I realized how bad it was, she'd built this fortress of control and I couldn't reach her. Why tell me this? Because you reached her when I couldn't. You held up a mirror and made her see what she'd become. I'm grateful. We're divorced now, finalized last week. But we're talking again. Co-parenting our daughter, trying to be friends. That wouldn't be possible if you'd crushed her completely. He drove away, leaving me in falling snow with Sargent, trying to understand how I'd become someone people thanked for showing mercy to someone who tried to destroy me. Christmas came quietly. I spent it alone with Sargent, which was how I preferred it. Emily sent a card, heard about your case, saw you on the news. I'm proud of you, Mark. You finally found something worth fighting for that wasn't just fighting itself. Just Emily. No love or endearments from our marriage, but the sentiment was kind. New Year's Eve, Thomas invited me to a neighborhood party. I almost declined, but something made me accept. When I arrived with Sargent, conversation stopped. Then Thomas raised his glass. To Marcus Thornton, and the man who reminded us that doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing. People drank, some enthusiastic, others uncomfortable. The neighborhood still divided on whether I was hero or troublemaker. But the division was quieter now, less hostile, learning to live with ambiguity. Stephen Park approached later, drink in hand. Property values actually went up after everything. Turns out people want to live where discrimination isn't tolerated, where rules protect everyone. Who would have thought? There's talk of renaming the park, where Vivienne had her breakdown, Second Chances Park. That's not necessary. Maybe not, but people like symbols. What happened here, what you and Vivienne both went through, means something to them. I left early, uncomfortable with attention. Walked home through streets still decorated with Christmas lights. Sargent trotted beside me, breath visible in cold air. We passed Vivienne's house. Through a window, I saw her at a table, papers spread before her, face in hands, shoulders shaking. For the first time since we met, she looked small, human, breakable. Sargent pulled toward her house, sensing distress. Not this time, buddy. We kept walking. January brought Vivienne's 6th visit. This time she brought someone. A teenage girl with Vivienne's eyes and Robert's bone structure. This is Sophia, my daughter. She wanted to meet you. The girl's handshake was firm, assured. Thank you for not destroying my mom completely. I didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. I just insisted she clean up the mess. Sophia smiled. Mom said you'd say something like that. She wanted me to see Sargent, to understand why she was so wrong. We spent the afternoon together. Sophia asked questions with youthful directness. Why did you fight so hard? Why didn't you just move? Why did you let her try to make amends? I answered honestly, because Sargent is my lifeline, because running doesn't solve problems, because I've made enough mistakes to know people can change if you give them space to try. Before they left, she hugged Sargent, this girl who'd grown up knowing her mother as broken, learning that maybe broken things could be repaired. After they left, I called Dr. Kim. How are you doing with being the person Vivienne looks to for redemption? I'm not sure. Sometimes I think I'm helping. Sometimes I think I'm just letting myself be used. Those aren't mutually exclusive. You can genuinely help while she benefits. The question is, does being part of her recovery help or hurt you? It helps. Makes the fight feel like it meant something beyond winning. Like maybe we both came out better. Then trust that. February came with the 1-year anniversary of my arrival. 12 months in the house. 10 months fighting. 6 months helping her heal. The symmetry felt significant. Elena called with the last settlement. Every family compensated. Full payment plus damages. $2 million total from insurance. Vivienne's contribution was $120. Federal fines $300,000. It's done. Every family made whole financially. Every policy changed. Every discriminatory bylaw removed. We did it. No, you did it by being willing to stand when walking away would have been easier. I just filed paperwork. That night, despite cold, I sat on the porch. Sargent lay across my feet for warmth. 1 year, all that had happened. Fear and anger, mediation and settlements. Slow, painful work of accountability. Monthly visits transforming enemies into something more complicated than friends but less hostile than strangers. Late that evening, Vivienne called instead of texting. Her voice was thick with emotion. Tomorrow is my 1-year sobriety anniversary. I didn't tell you before, but after Andrew died, I developed a drinking problem. Used alcohol to numb grief like I used control to manage fear. Got sober the day after you moved in. The day I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross." She paused, gathering herself. "You didn't just save 17 families, Marcus. You saved me too." I sat in the cold with the phone pressed to my ear, looking up at stars brilliant in clear sky. "Congratulations on 1 year. That's hard work. Harder than anything else, but worth it." After we hung up, I stayed outside. Somewhere in this neighborhood, Vivienne celebrated a year sober, probably alone, probably struggling with amends still owed. Somewhere, Emma slept with Sonny at her bed's foot, anxiety managed. Somewhere, Maria rebuilt in Denver, settlement money giving fresh starts. And here I was, in the home I'd fought to keep, with the dog who'd saved me countless times, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, not yet. But the possibility of it. Sargent shifted, head on my knee. I ran fingers through his fur, feeling each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of life he'd given back. The fence Dante built stood silver in moonlight, weathered but solid. No longer a statement of defiance, just a structure that created safety without isolation. March brought the Colorado Bar Association ceremony. Elena had been nominated for a civil rights award, and she'd insisted I attend. The hotel ballroom in Denver filled with lawyers and judges who'd spent careers fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Elena gave her speech about the Fair Housing Act, about disability discrimination hiding behind neutral policies, about aggressive advocacy. Then she did something I hadn't expected. This case worked because of two people's courage. Marcus Thornton's courage to fight when surrender would have been easier, and Vivienne Blackwell's courage to admit wrong and spend years making it right. She gestured to where Vivienne sat in the audience, then to me. Justice without accountability is empty. Accountability without redemption is cruel. Somehow, these two found the balance. Standing when Elena called me forward, looking out at hundreds of advocates, I felt the full weight of what we'd been part of. This wasn't just about keeping a dog. It was about changing how power could be held accountable while still allowing transformation. After the ceremony, Robert approached with Vivienne beside him. They looked healthier together than apart, despite the divorce. "We're having dinner. Would you join us?" The restaurant was quiet, intimate. Vivienne had changed into casual clothes, more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. Sophia's graduating high school next month. She wants to study social work. Robert smiled with genuine affection. She says watching her mother work through mistakes taught her that helping people fix their lives matters more than judging them for breaking. That's profound for 18. She gets that from her mother. Despite everything, Robert's tone was warm. We talked for 2 hours. Sophia's college plans, latest dogs placed through the memorial fund, my healing journey. At some point I realized we weren't enemies anymore, weren't even former enemies. Just 3 people who'd survived something difficult together and emerged changed. "I've been offered a position," Vivienne said as dinner ended. "Regional director for a disability rights advocacy organization. Real job, paid, using everything I learned from community service. But I wanted to check with you first. Make sure you're comfortable with me having that platform." "It's your life. You don't need my permission." "Maybe not legally, but morally, after what I did, I feel like I should ask." "Take the job. Use what you learned. Help people, that's the whole point of redemption." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Spring arrived with Thomas Wayne's invitation to speak at the annual community meeting. The topic: transformation of Riverside Falls over the past year. I stood at the podium looking out at 200 residents. Some from the beginning, others who'd moved in after the federal consent decree made the neighborhood famous for choosing change after doing wrong. A year ago, I moved here wanting peace. Instead, I found war. An HOA president who saw me and my service dog as threats to eliminate. A community divided between those supporting discrimination and those too afraid to oppose it. I paused, found Vivienne in the front row beside Thomas and Maria Gonzalez, who'd moved back and joined the new board. But I learned something. I wasn't fighting for the right to have Sargent, though that's how it started. I was fighting for the principle that vulnerability deserves protection, not punishment. That disability requires accommodation, not exclusion. That fear, no matter how understandable, doesn't justify harm. The room was absolutely silent. And I learned that people can change. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely. Vivienne Blackwell tried to destroy me. Then she destroyed herself. Then she rebuilt into someone who's helped nearly 100 veterans get support they need. That transformation didn't happen because I crushed her. It happened because I demanded accountability while leaving room for redemption. I stepped down to sustained applause. Vivienne waited at the steps. That was perfect. It was true, that's all. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? She lowered her voice. After mediation, but before sentencing, I drove to a bridge. Was going to jump. Had it planned. Then the VA called. A veteran I'd helped wanted to thank me. Said his dog saved his life that morning, stopped his suicide. I realized if I ended my life, I'd waste the possibility I could save others. Your mercy gave me that possibility. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you off easy. That night, an email from Dr. Kim. Subject, officially graduated. Marcus, after a year of monthly sessions, I'm discharging you from active treatment. You've done everything therapy can teach. Processed trauma, developed coping mechanisms, built support systems, learned to live with PTSD instead of being controlled by it. You're ready to just live. Congratulations on doing the hardest work a person can do. I read it 3 times. A year ago, I'd been barely holding on, kept alive by a dog and stubborn refusal to surrender. Now I was someone who'd not only survived, but helped others survive. Someone who'd turned personal pain into public good. Major sensed my shift and climbed into my lap, all 90 pounds providing deep pressure. I hugged this dog who wasn't Sargent, but was exactly what I needed. Sargent's legacy was lives touched directly. Mine, Emma's, Vivienne's, everyone who'd learned service dogs weren't threats but lifelines. Major's legacy was still being written, but already he'd shown me healing could continue. New chapters could be as meaningful as old ones. My legacy? Maybe showing that standing up to injustice didn't require destroying the unjust. That accountability and compassion could coexist. That the hardest fights sometimes end not with winners and losers, but with everyone changed for better. 2 years after moving to Riverside Falls, I stood at Sargent's grave on the anniversary of his death. The oak had grown, branches spreading, roots deepening. Flowers bloomed around the headstone, planted by neighbors who'd never met him but understood what he represented. Major sat beside me as I told Sargent about the year. Vivienne's new job, Emma graduating, planning veterinary medicine, the 100th veteran receiving a dog through the Memorial Fund, Alina's firm expanding across 3 states, Thomas re-elected president on a platform of radical inclusion. About me, finally truly healing. I miss you, buddy, but you did your job, kept me alive long enough to learn how to keep myself alive. Now Major's doing the same. That's the thing about good dogs. They teach us to be better humans, then trust us to pass it on. Sunset, painting Colorado sky gold and crimson. I walked home through the neighborhood transformed from battlefield to community. People waved. Kids asked to pet Major. The fence, once defiance, now just weathered wood-marking boundaries without creating barriers. That evening, Vivienne's text arrived. 2 years since I destroyed my life trying to destroy yours. 2 years sobriety, therapy, amends, learning to be someone Andrew would have been proud of. Thank you for fighting back, for demanding I be better, for refusing to let mercy mean escape. You saved my life as surely as Sargent saved yours. I responded, we saved each other. That's what community means. It was true. This strange, unlikely journey from enemies to allies had saved us both. I'd learned fighting could build instead of destroy. She'd learned control was illusion, but accountability was real. Together, we'd shown the hardest conflicts could end in transformation instead of devastation. Major nudged my hand. Dinner time. Outside, light faded. The fence stood silver in gathering darkness. The neighborhood settled into evening rhythms. Somewhere across the street in what used to be enemy territory, Vivienne sat with her own thoughts, her own gratitude for second chances, her own understanding that redemption wasn't destination but direction. We were all moving forward, changed and changing, broken and healing, learning daily what it meant to be human in a world that made being human impossibly hard and occasionally, miraculously, beautiful. I looked at Major, this dog existing because I'd been willing to fight and forgive. Good boy, best boy, we're going to be okay. And for the first time in years, I believed it completely. Sargent died on a Thursday morning in April, 3 years after I moved to Riverside Falls, when the spring flowers were blooming and the world looked like it was celebrating life instead of preparing for grief. He'd been slowing down for months, his massive frame developing the stiffness that comes with age, his walks getting shorter, his sleep getting deeper. The vet had warned me 6 weeks earlier that his time was limited, that the arthritis in his hips was progressing, that his heart was showing signs of strain. I'd known this day would come. I'd prepared for it the way you prepare for any inevitable loss, which is to say not at all, not really. You can't prepare for the moment when the thing that saved your life stops breathing. He went peacefully in his sleep, curled up in his favorite spot on the living room floor where the morning sun came through the window. I found him when I came downstairs to make coffee, and for a moment my brain refused to process what I was seeing. He looked like he was sleeping, like he'd wake up any second and yawn and stretch and look at me with those patient brown eyes. But he didn't wake up. He was just gone, as completely and finally as anything can be gone. I sat on the floor beside him for 2 hours, my hand on his still warm fur, and I cried harder than I'd cried since Kabul, since the explosion that took 3 of my brothers and left me alive for reasons I still didn't fully understand. Sargent had pulled me back from death more times than I could count, had given me a reason to keep breathing when breathing felt like too much work. And now he was gone and I was still here, and I didn't know how to do this without him. Eventually, I called Dr. Kim. She came to the house, not as my therapist but as my friend, and she sat with me on the floor while I held Sargent's head in my lap and tried to say goodbye to the best friend I'd ever had. He had a good life, she said quietly. He did exactly what he was meant to do. He saved you. I don't know if I can do this without him. You can. You've been getting better for years now. The panic attacks are rare. The nightmares are manageable. Sargent built you a foundation. Now you have to trust that it's strong enough to stand on alone. The funeral was 3 days later. I say funeral because that's what it was, even though most people don't have funerals for dogs. But Sargent wasn't just a dog. Elena helped me arrange it, booking the community park gazebo, sending word through the neighborhood that anyone who wanted to pay respects was welcome. Over 100 people came. Veterans I'd met through the VA support groups, families from Riverside Falls, people I'd never seen before who'd heard about Sargent through Elena's advocacy work or the news coverage of the case. Thomas Wayne was there with Emma and Sonny. Stephen Park came with his wife and kids. Maria Gonzalez drove from Denver. And Vivienne came, arriving early and sitting in the back, her face drawn with grief that I knew wasn't just about Sargent, but about everything he represented. I stood at the front with a simple wooden box containing Sargent's ashes, and I tried to find words adequate to the moment. Everything I thought to say felt insufficient, too small to contain what he'd meant. Sargent was 8 years old, I finally managed. He saved my life approximately 1,000 times. Every panic attack he interrupted. Every nightmare he woke me from. Every moment he reminded me that I wasn't alone in this world. People say dogs don't go to heaven. I say if Sargent isn't there, I don't want to go. My voice broke on the last word, and I couldn't continue. Thomas stood up and put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that said everything words couldn't. After the service, after everyone had left except Alina and Dr. Kim and Vivienne, I walked to the spot behind my house where Dante's crew had spent the morning digging. They'd created a grave under the oak tree nearest the fence, in the place where Sargent used to lie in the shade on summer afternoons. The headstone was simple granite. Sargent, 2016 to 2024, the goodest boy, he saved more than one life. We buried him as the sun was setting, the Colorado sky painted in shades of orange and gold, and I stayed there long after everyone else had gone home, sitting with my back against the oak tree, feeling more alone than I'd felt since the divorce. Vivienne was the last to leave. She approached carefully, respecting my space, and knelt down to place a small bouquet of flowers on the fresh earth. "Thank you for sharing him with me," she said. "Those monthly visits, learning not to be afraid, that was Sargent's gift as much as yours. He was good at that, giving gifts without expecting anything in return." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I know this isn't the time, but I wanted you to know. I finished my community service last month, 1,000 hours at the VA. I helped place 83 service dogs with veterans who needed them. Every single one of them reminded me of what I almost took from you. You did take it from me, just not permanently. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful that you fought back." After she left, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, and I thought about the strange path that had brought me here. 3 years ago, I'd arrived in this neighborhood as a stranger, been declared unwelcome, fought a war I never wanted, and somehow emerged on the other side with a community I belonged to and an enemy transformed into something approaching a friend. And through it all, Sargent had been beside me, patient and steady and utterly reliable in a world that felt fundamentally unreliable. Now he was gone, and I had to figure out how to be Marcus Thornton without him. The weeks after Sargent's death were harder than I expected. I thought I was stable, thought I'd healed enough that I could handle his loss. I was wrong. The panic attacks came back with a vengeance, sudden and overwhelming. I'd be making coffee and my hands would start shaking and I couldn't breathe and there was no warm weight pressing against my legs to ground me. The nightmares returned, Cobble mixing with Riverside Falls in surreal combinations, where I was trying to save Sargent from an explosion while Vivienne screamed about violations. Dr. Kim increased our sessions to twice a week. She was patient but firm, walking me through the grief, reminding me that regression was normal, that healing wasn't linear. "Have you thought about another dog?" she asked during one session. "I can't, not yet. It feels like replacing him." "You wouldn't be replacing him. You'd be honoring what he taught you about why service dogs matter." "I don't know if I can love another dog the way I loved him." "You probably can't. Every relationship is unique. But that doesn't mean you can't love a different dog in a different way." I sat with that for a while, the idea that maybe I didn't have to replicate what I had with Sargent, that maybe I could find something new that worked in its own way. 2 months after Sargent died, Emma Wayne knocked on my door. She had Sonny with her, and the dog looked at me with the kind of knowing patience that suggested she understood I was struggling. "Mr. Marcus," Emma said, her voice small and serious, "Sonny knows you're sad. Can we come in?" I let them inside, and Emma sat on my couch while Sonny immediately came over and rested her head on my knee, applying the same deep pressure therapy she used with Emma. The weight of her, the warmth, the simple presence of a dog doing what dogs do best, something in my chest unclenched. "Does it help?" Emma asked. "Yeah, sweetheart, it helps." "When Sargent died, were you scared you'd always be sad?" "Terrified. Daddy says being sad about losing someone means they mattered. He says it's okay to be sad because it means you loved them enough to hurt when they're gone." "Your dad is a wise man." She nodded, satisfied, and for the next hour I sat with this 12-year-old girl and her therapy dog, and I let myself feel the grief without fighting it, let it wash over me and through me and eventually, finally, begin to ease. After Emma left, I called the service dog training organization that had placed Sargent with me. The woman who answered, Karen, remembered me immediately. "Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry about Sargent. He was one of our best graduates." "Thank you. I'm calling because Dr. Kim thinks I should consider another dog. I'm not sure I'm ready, but I wanted to know what the process would be." "We actually have a dog who might be perfect for you." She paused, and I heard papers shuffling. "His name is Major. He's a 2-year-old Rottweiler who washed out of police K-9 training because he's too gentle." Sound familiar? Too gentle for police work, but perfect for PTSD support. Exactly. He's been in advanced service dog training for 8 months. He's ready to place, but we've been selective about his handler because he's sensitive. Needs someone patient who understands the breed. Can I meet him? How about tomorrow? The training facility was an hour north of Riverside Falls, set on 20 acres of rolling hills where dogs and handlers worked together in various stages of preparation. Karen met me at the gate, and we walked past training fields where dogs were learning to navigate crowds, respond to distress signals, perform complex tasks. Major was in a separate enclosure, playing with a tennis ball by himself. When he saw us approaching, he stopped, tilted his head, and watched with an intensity that reminded me so much of Sargent that my breath caught. "He looks just like him," I said. "Same breeder, actually, but very different personality. Sargent was serious, focused. Major is playful, affectionate. He'll work just as hard, but he'll do it with his tail wagging." She opened the gate and Major bounded over, not jumping up but pressing himself against my legs in immediate contact. I knelt down and he licked my face, my hands, making sounds of pure joy at having found a human to love. And just like that, without deciding to, without planning it, I was crying again. But this time it wasn't grief. It was recognition. This dog didn't replace Sargent. He couldn't. But he offered something I desperately needed. A reason to keep going, a living creature who needed me as much as I needed him. Can I take him home? Karen smiled. I was hoping you'd ask. The transition wasn't seamless. Major had his own personality, his own quirks, his own way of working. Where Sargent had been a steady, silent presence, Major was exuberant, vocal, constantly seeking interaction. He didn't just perform deep pressure therapy, he practically climbed into my lap to provide it. He didn't just alert to panic attacks, he tried to lick them away. It was different, but different didn't mean worse. Within a month, the panic attacks had decreased again. Within 2 months, I was sleeping through most nights. Major wasn't Sargent, would never be Sargent, but he was exactly what I needed in this phase of my healing. Vivienne's reaction when she met Major was everything I could have hoped for. It was her 12th visit, our 1-year anniversary of the monthly sessions that had somehow become a permanent fixture in both our lives. When she saw Major in the driveway, she didn't freeze or panic. She smiled. "You got another Rottweiler," she said, wonder in her voice. Seemed appropriate. She knelt down and Major immediately went to her, tail wagging, offering the kind of uncomplicated affection that had taken her months to accept from Sargent. She hugged him, laughing as he tried to lick her face, and I saw how far she'd come from the woman who'd tried to ban these dogs from the neighborhood. "I've been working with the VA to establish a fund," she said as we sat on the porch. "The Sargent Memorial Fund. It helps veterans who can't afford service dogs get them for free. We've placed 12 dogs so far." "That's incredible." "It's the least I can do." She looked at Major, who was sprawled across both our feet. "Every time I help place a dog, I think about what I almost destroyed. About you and Sargent and all the people who might never have gotten help if you hadn't fought back. You've placed 83 dogs total. 12 through the Memorial Fund. That's 95 lives changed because you chose to make amends instead of just accepting punishment. I'm not sure it balances out the harm I caused." "It doesn't have to balance. It just has to matter." That fall, 3.5 years after I'd first moved to Riverside Falls, Elena called with unexpected news. I've been nominated for a civil rights award. The Colorado Bar Association. They cited the Riverside Falls case as precedent-setting work. "Congratulations. You deserve it. I want you there when I accept it. You and Vivienne both." "Vivienne. The narrative isn't complete without both of you. The veteran who stood up for his rights and the woman who learned to acknowledge her wrongs. That's the story that matters." The ceremony was held in a hotel ballroom in downtown Denver, filled with lawyers and judges and activists who'd spent careers fighting for the rights of people who couldn't fight for themselves. Elena gave a speech about the importance of the Fair Housing Act, about how disability discrimination often hides behind neutral-sounding policies, about the need for aggressive advocacy. Then she called me and Vivienne to the stage. "This case worked because of two people's courage," she said. "Marcus Thornton's courage to fight when surrender would have been easier, and Vivienne Blackwell's courage to admit wrong and spend years making it right. Justice without accountability is empty. Accountability without the possibility of redemption is cruel. Somehow, these two people found the balance." Standing on that stage with Vivienne beside me, looking out at hundreds of people who worked in a system designed to protect the vulnerable, I felt the full weight of what we'd been part of. This wasn't just about me keeping a dog anymore. It was about changing how power could be held accountable, about demonstrating that people could transform, about proving that mercy and justice weren't opposing forces, but complementary ones. After the ceremony, Robert Blackwell approached me. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, less burdened. "Vivienne and I are having dinner. Would you like to join us?" "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Please, we'd like to thank you properly." The restaurant was quiet, intimate, the kind of place where conversations stayed private. Vivienne had changed from her ceremony clothes into casual wear, and she looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Sophia's graduating high school next month," she said. "She wants to study social work. She says watching me work through my mistakes taught her that helping people fix their lives matters more than judging them for having broken ones." That's profound for an 18-year-old. She's always been wise beyond her years. Robert smiled, and there was real affection in his voice despite the divorce. She gets that from her mother. We talked for 2 hours, ranging across topics from Sophia's college plans to the latest dogs placed through the Memorial Fund to my own healing journey with Major. At some point I realized we weren't enemies anymore. weren't even former enemies. We were just three people who'd been through something difficult together and come out the other side changed. "I need to tell you something," Vivienne said as dinner wound down. "I've been offered a position. Regional Director for a disability rights advocacy organization. It's a real job, paid, using everything I learned from my community service. But I wanted to check with you first. Make sure you're comfortable with me having that kind of platform." "It's your life, Vivienne. You don't need my permission." "Maybe not legally, but morally, after what I did, I feel like I should ask." "Then yes, take the job, use what you learned. Help people. That's the whole point of redemption." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." 4 years after I moved to Riverside Falls, on a spring morning that reminded me of the day Sargent died, I stood in my backyard with Major and looked at the fence Dante had built. The cedar had weathered to silver gray, the wood soft with age, but the structure remained solid. Over the years, the fence had become less of a barrier and more of a frame, defining my space without cutting me off from the community beyond it. Thomas Wayne had invited me to speak at the annual Riverside Falls community meeting. The topic was the transformation of the neighborhood over the past 4 years, the lessons learned, the policies changed. I stood at the podium looking out at 200 residents, some who'd been here since the beginning, others who'd moved in after the federal consent decree made the neighborhood famous for doing the right thing after doing so much wrong. 4 years ago, I moved here wanting peace. I began. Instead, I found war. An HOA president who saw me and my service dog as threats to be eliminated. A community divided between people who supported discrimination and people too afraid to oppose it. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the thing you're fighting against isn't really what you're fighting for. I wasn't fighting for the right to have Sargent, though that's how it started. I was fighting for the principle that vulnerability deserves protection, not punishment. That disability requires accommodation, not exclusion. That fear, no matter how understandable, doesn't justify harm. I looked at Vivienne, sitting in the front row beside Thomas and Maria Gonzalez, who'd moved back to Colorado and joined the new HOA board. And I learned that people can change, not easily, not quickly, but genuinely. Vivienne Blackwell tried to destroy me, then she destroyed herself. Then she rebuilt herself into someone who's helped nearly 100 veterans get the support they need. That transformation didn't happen because I crushed her. It happened because I demanded accountability while leaving room for redemption. The room was silent, everyone listening with the kind of attention that suggested these words mattered to them personally. Today, Riverside Falls is held up as a model. Other HOAs study our policies. Law schools teach our case. But the real legacy isn't in the legal precedent. It's in Emma Wayne having Sonny. It's in the 17 families who received justice. It's in every dog placed through the Sargent Memorial Fund. It's in a community that learned the hard way that inclusion makes us stronger, not weaker. I stepped down from the podium to sustained applause, and Vivienne was waiting at the bottom of the steps. "That was perfect," she said. "It was true, that's all. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Go ahead." When I was at my lowest point, after the mediation but before sentencing, I drove out to a bridge. I was going to jump. I had it all planned. But then I got a call from the VA. A veteran I'd helped get a service dog wanted to thank me personally. He said his dog had saved his life that morning, stopped him from committing suicide. And I realized that if I ended my life, I'd be wasting the possibility that I could save others. Your mercy gave me that possibility. "I didn't save you, Vivienne. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you off easy while you did it." That night, back home with Major sprawled across my feet, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There was a message from Dr. Kim with a subject line that made me smile. Officially graduated. Marcus, the email read, "After 4 years of work, I'm formally discharging you from active treatment. You've done everything therapy can teach a person to do. You've processed your trauma, developed healthy coping mechanisms, built a support system, and learned to live with PTSD instead of being controlled by it. I'll always be here if you need me, but you don't need weekly sessions anymore. You're ready to just live. Congratulations on doing the hardest work a person can do." With admiration, Sarah. I read it 3 times, letting it sink in. 4 years ago, I'd been a man barely holding on, kept alive by a dog and sheer stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. Now I was someone who'd not only survived, but helped others survive too. Someone who'd turned personal pain into public good. Someone who'd learned that fighting for what's right sometimes means fighting for people to have the chance to become better than they were. Major sensed my emotional shift and climbed fully into my lap, all 90 pounds of him, providing the deep pressure that signaled everything was okay. I hugged him, this dog who wasn't Sergeant, but who was exactly what I needed him to be, and I thought about legacy. Sergeant's legacy was the lives he'd touched directly. Mine, Emma's, Vivienne's, every person who'd learned from our story that service dogs weren't threats, but lifelines. Major's legacy was still being written, but already he'd helped me understand that healing could continue, that new chapters could be as meaningful as old ones. And my legacy? Maybe it was showing that standing up to injustice didn't have to mean destroying the unjust, that accountability and compassion could coexist, that the hardest fights sometimes end not with winners and losers, but with everyone changed for the better. 5 years after moving to Riverside Falls, I stood at Sergeant's grave on the anniversary of his death. The oak tree had grown, its branches spreading wider, its roots deeper. Flowers bloomed around the headstone, planted by neighbors who'd never met Sergeant but who understood what he represented. Major sat beside me, patient and calm, as I told Sergeant about the year that had passed, about Vivienne's new job, about Emma graduating high school and planning to study veterinary medicine, about the 100th veteran receiving a dog through the Memorial Fund, about Alina's law firm expanding to handle civil rights cases across 3 states, about Thomas Wayne being re-elected HOA President for the 3rd consecutive term on a platform of radical inclusion. About me, finally truly healing. "I miss you, buddy," I said to the stone, to the memory, to the dog who'd saved my life so many times I'd lost count. "But you did your job. You kept me alive long enough to learn how to keep myself alive. And now Major's doing the same for someone new. That's the thing about good dogs. They teach us how to be better humans, and then they trust us to pass it on." The sun was setting, painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and crimson, and I walked home through a neighborhood that had transformed from battlefield to community. People waved as I passed. Kids asked to pet Major. The fence that had once been a statement of defiance was now just a fence, weather-worn and ordinary, marking boundaries without creating barriers. That evening, Vivienne sent her monthly text, though we'd long since moved past the requirement of the settlement agreement. "Today makes 5 years since I destroyed my life by trying to destroy yours. 5 years of sobriety, of therapy, of making amends, of learning to be someone Andrew would have been proud of. I know I say this every year, but thank you. For fighting back. For demanding I be better. For refusing to let mercy mean escape. You saved my life as surely as Sergeant saved yours." I responded simply, "We saved each other. That's what community means." And it was true. This strange, unlikely, complicated journey from enemies to allies had saved us both. I'd learned that fighting could be about building instead of destroying. She'd learned that control was an illusion, but accountability was real. Together, we demonstrated that the hardest conflicts could end in transformation instead of devastation. Major nudged my hand, reminding me it was dinner time, and I got up to feed him, to continue the simple daily work of living a life that felt, finally, genuinely worth living. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. The fence stood silver and solid in the gathering darkness. The neighborhood settled into its evening rhythms. And somewhere in the house across the street that used to belong to an enemy, Vivienne Blackwell was probably sitting with her own thoughts, her own gratitude for second chances, her own understanding that redemption wasn't a destination but a direction. We were all moving forward now, changed and changing, broken and healing, learning every day what it meant to be human in a world that made being human so impossibly hard and occasionally, miraculously, transcendently beautiful. I looked at Major, at this dog who existed because I'd been willing to fight and to forgive, and I whispered the same words I'd said to Sergeant 1,000 times. Good boy, best boy, we're going to be okay. And for the first time in years, I believed it completely.